Hello and welcome to the Megacast by Actual Tech Media. Today's topic, enhancing your public, private, and hybrid cloud security posture. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got an amazing Megacast lined up for you. On the event, you'll hear from our experts at Gigamon, Rubric, Nutanix, Palo Alto Networks, Crowdstrike, Rapid7, Red Hat, Firemon, and Illumio, some of the most innovative companies in the world of cloud security today, and they've got some great presentations and demos lined up for you. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about this Megacast. We want this to be educational. All of us at Actual Tech Media are former IT professionals ourselves, and we know how tough it can be out there in the world of IT. We want to help to get your questions answered, and we'll be doing dedicated Q&A sessions with each of our expert presenters. We encourage you to use the questions pane there in your audience console. We welcome all your hello and good morning messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want to hear about your cloud security challenges, and we want to help you to solve those. We also have our best question prize, which I'll talk about here in just a moment, to help encourage your questions. And along the way, I'll have some poll questions for you as well, and we appreciate your participation in those. We also want this to be a social event, and you can tweet directly from your audience console using the Twitter icon there on the screen. The hashtag for the event, ATM Megacast, over on Twitter will be automatically appended when you tweet. We appreciate you sharing the great things that you learned on the Megacast today. I also want to encourage you to check out the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find some hand-selected resources from today's expert presenters. And finally, prizes. This is a Megacast, and we have a mega lineup of prizes, I like to say. We'll be announcing the winners of 5 DJI Mavic Air 2 drones on the Megacast. These are some awesome drones, and if that is not enough, we'll be giving out Amazon $500 gift cards every 30 minutes after every presentation on the Megacast today. You must be live in attendance to qualify and meet the Actual Tech Media Prize terms and conditions that you can find there in your Handouts tab. And as I mentioned, we also have our Best Question prize for $50 Amazon gift cards after each session. Prize winners will be selected and contacted after the event. And of course, you must meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. And of course, you always have the option to make a donation to a selected charity. Over the years, we've donated thousands of dollars to charities thanks to generous prize winners. So if you win a prize and you'd like to donate to charity, we would love to help you do that. As I mentioned, over on Twitter, the hashtag is ATM Megacast. You can follow Actual Tech Media on Twitter and me, your moderator, David M. Davis, as well. Subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media channels on YouTube, Facebook, and our 10 on Tech podcast, as well as our LinkedIn channel there on the top right-hand side of your audience console. And in the Handouts tab, I encourage you to check out the gorilla.guide website. This is where you can download free, easy-to-read enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts. It's a great way to stay up to date on enterprise technology. You can download these to your Kindle or mobile device and read them at your leisure. Again, the website for all these free IT books is gorilla.guide, and you'll find it there in the Handouts tab. After the Megacast today, you'll be automatically redirected to our Refer a Friend page, or you'll find the link right now in the Handouts tab. And if you refer your IT friends and IT coworkers, you'll be entered into a drawing where you both could win an Amazon $300 gift. Those drawings are held every month. We promise not to spam your friends and coworkers. We'll just send them an invitation to an upcoming event. If they don't respond, we'll remind them one more time, and then we won't bother them again. So we hope that you learned a lot on the Megacast today and encourage your IT friends and coworkers to join you on an upcoming event. And with that, I want to briefly talk about today's topic. And first, answer the question, why? Why is this topic so important? Why are we talking about enhancing our public, private, and hybrid cloud security posture? Well, traditional legacy infrastructure can be inefficient, complex, costly, and increasingly it's just not meeting the needs of the business. A lot of us might feel like this guy, constantly being pushed to try to do more with less with our aging tools. But the cloud model, whether it's public, private, or hybrid, provides us so much efficiency and agility for the business. It gives us infinite scalability, and that pay-as-you-go, utility-based pricing model that the business loves. The financial folks love to move from the CapEx model to the OpEx model. And most importantly, it allows us in the IT organization to really focus on what matters, the business and its applications. But there's a lot of confusion around cloud. There's multiple forms of cloud, so many different as-a-service offerings. There's incompatibilities between on-premises and cloud images, differences in management models. And one of the biggest points of concern and confusion is around cloud security. And that's why I believe this event is so important. We're here to help answer your questions around cloud security and help you to find the most innovative cloud security solutions available to you today. Because it's a scary time to be responsible for your IT organization's data, whether it's in a private, hybrid, or public cloud. Statistics tell us things like cybercrime damages are expected to hit 10.5 trillion annually by 2025. I mean, for this year alone, cybercrime damages are expected to reach $6 trillion, and that figure slightly exceeds the size of the GDP of Japan, the third largest global economy. But you might be thinking, what are the odds of us getting hit with some sort of cybersecurity breach? Well, 40% of companies out there have suffered a cybersecurity breach or attack in the last 12 months alone. And in fact, those attacks were highest in medium-sized companies. And you also might be thinking, well, I mean, if we get hit with a cyber attack, we won't be down that long. You know, how long could we possibly be down? Well, 50 days is the time that it takes on average to recover from a cyber attack. So as you're doing your planning for this year and next, and you're looking at your project list and to-do list, it's a great time to be thinking about cloud security. You need to think about how you can gain visibility into your traffic flow. How can you protect your data that's spread across all the different clouds and software as a service applications? How can you achieve compliance in your more and more distributed environment? What can you do to best protect your network and your data from a cybersecurity breach? And if you are hit with some sort of breach, what can you do to rapidly recover? It's a great time to pause and think about all of these questions and then just sit back and learn, because we've got a great event lined up for you with the top names in public, private, and hybrid cloud security on today's Megacast. Now, before I introduce you to our first presenter, I've got a few poll questions for you. All right, our first poll question here is on the screen. We want to hear, what are your greatest IT challenges regarding cloud security? And this is a multi-select question, so feel free to select more than one. Most likely you have more than one challenge. And if I missed a challenge, and I'm pretty sure I did, select the other challenge not listed and just drop it in the questions box there. Just comment, whatever it is. Cloud is too scary, whatever it is. I want to hear your challenge. Drop it in the questions box, and I will share it with the audience and improve the poll here in the future. So I'll share the results of this poll here in just a moment. I'll let everyone respond first. Scott said that security is the biggest challenge. So I like that. Excellent to hear, Scott. Thank you for sharing that. Well said. Eric said, our biggest challenge is budget, lacking a sufficient budget to implement a good strategy. Seema, I believe is how you say it, said cloud storage, the space in the cloud. A lot of people are uploading data and just using it as cloud storage, and it's staying out there forever. And of course, that costs a lot of money. All right, thank you to everyone there who responded to the poll. Yeah, let me share this with you. And it looks like it was a tie between data protection, disaster recovery, and network and security visibility. Those two really came in, right, almost at 50% of the audience saying those are one of their greatest challenges, followed by really just an even tie around compliance, threat mitigation, vulnerability management. And 33 folks out there said they have another challenge that's not listed. Rita said that visibility would solve a lot of the security issues out there. I bet you're right about that, Rita. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let me go on now to the second poll of 3. We've got 3 polls here before I introduce you to our first presenter. And the question on the screen is, what's your time frame for adding new or updating existing IT solutions at your company, specifically around, cloud security? All right, thank you to everyone who responded here to this poll. We appreciate it. And then last poll of 3, and I'm just curious here, what are you hoping for out of the solutions on the Megacast today? What is it, like at a high level, you want from these types of solutions? Efficiency, security, maybe business agility for your company. Just we can do things faster. Are you looking for greater scalability? Like we've just got too many, whatever it is, cloud apps, cloud storage, too much data to protect. Is it cost savings or optimization? Maybe we want to spend less, or maybe we just want to spend the same, but we want to be able to do more with what we spend. Is it ease of use? Cloud security needs to be easier, or as a bonus, I threw in peace of mind at the end there. Or if there's something not on the list, again, drop it in the questions pane, and I will share it. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to that poll. It looks like 62% said increased security. You're on the Cloud Security Megacast. You're in the right place, followed by cost savings or optimization and ease of use. So thank you, everyone, for your feedback. We do appreciate it. We'll have a few more polls here during the Megacast, but it's now time to kick it off with our first presenter. I'm excited to introduce Fayaz Rajpari, Senior Director of Product Management at Gigamon. Fayaz, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thanks for being on. Take it away.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And today I'll be discussing our Gigamon Threat Insight Network Detection and Response solution. So what I want to do is I want to first start out by, I think it's really important to start out with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, as everyone probably on this call is familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, then you should be, right? So MITRE ATT&CK framework is very common in the security community, and mostly most organizations that have a security operations center or some type of cybersecurity program is essentially attempting to map to this to some point and understanding what their capabilities look like. So from that perspective, kind of want to go into a little bit of detail on why this is important and how Threat Insight kind of maps to this. First and foremost, right, is if you kind of look at the left of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right, it's an accepted fact that most products and security solutions typically, back in the day were attempting to prevent even the initial access and execution. So typically, I've been doing this for quite some time now, and I remember my early days when I started on the security vendor side, starting and talking through, like, we prevent all attacks, right, and found that, that's really not true. And the fact of the matter is that a determined attacker will always get into the environment, and if they're motivated to get something or for whatever, whether it's financial gain or economic gain or espionage activities, etc., a motivated attacker will get in. So we found that they're good at getting past these preventative defenses, the typical security controls that you might have on the endpoint or at the perimeter, etc. And more so now, once they get in, they like to stay inside and stay hidden, right? So how do you get in using whether it's common credentials or doing activity within an organization that looks pretty normal, right? So using normal credentials that a normal employee may have, and being able to access those credentials or getting access to those, and then basically being inside the environment and escalating their privileges and carrying out their ways to do whatever they're looking to get within the environment. Moving laterally, saving credentials, et cetera, and then saving the intellectual property, and then talking to their own infrastructure, and exfiltrating or pilfering data, and then sending it back to their infrastructure. So what what the main challenge really is that that's the challenge from a security operations center having worked on the SOC and incident response side many, many years ago. This is a common challenge that still is here, even after 20 years in the industry, basically, where there's interruptions and attackers still prevail, and they still get what they need to because of this visibility gap. So how do you address this challenge? How do you kind of get through all of the stages of MITRE attack from an attack perspective and be a good defender and be able to not just say they're going to prevent it all, but if an attacker gets in, getting to the point where you're not all the way to the right. The way I look at the MITRE attack framework is the more to the right you get, the more in trouble you are, right? Because that's where it really becomes impactful. And as you see, the last one is impact, right? So how can you stay to the left of the MITRE attack framework and be proactive in your defending capabilities and get more mature as you move and progress in your security environment? So if you look at that, right, and if you kind of look at the main, the way you address this, SIMs have been out there for many years, coming back from, again, my early days of doing analysis work and using a SIM or many SIMs in my days. The challenge was is that you're always up against aggregating logs, having to tune those, or maybe even if a new security control or security solution comes in the environment, making sure that those logs come into the environment, making sure they're parsed correctly, making sure that that actually matches with whatever other integrations you have or correlations that you're doing, that you can actually read it properly and actually make sense of it, right? So SIMs actually gave you the visibility, but it was only the visibility that you were aware of, right? And the things that you were not aware of or other things that you were aware of, you had to still continue to tune, and it was a constant upkeep, continuous capability that you needed to have to be able to get across the board and get that level of detail. So the effectiveness was not as high as one would imagine. And then next, came endpoint detection and response. So if you look at endpoint detection and response, extremely effective, and coming from both a consumer of EDR solutions as well as actually being on the vendor side and actually talking about these quite a bit and as a practitioner, they were extremely effective because now you had the deep level and granular visibility on the endpoint that you could actually do live forensics, incident response, and actually understand actor behaviors, tactics, and tools, and understand what tools and procedures they're utilizing, right, to be able to get into the environment and move throughout the MITRE attack framework all the way to exfiltration and impact. However, there were other things that kind of got missed here, right? So for many of you that may be using the solution, you know this quite a bit, right, where there's still gaps. And coming from an endpoint world for many years, we find that the visibility on the endpoints, again, is only where an agent is actually installed, right? We find that in any organization, the endpoints are the most dynamic items in your organization, right? Because you may have many different flavors of operating systems. You may have other devices that, especially in this day and age with work from home becoming pretty normal, are you using your own devices to log in? Are you VPNing in? What other systems are joining and coming into the network that do not have an agent installed on it? Or if you do have systems that have an agent, what about when they get corrupt? Or what about many times in my previous years and experience, I've seen adversaries actually look and see if there isn't EDR endpoint solution on that system. They will then circumvent it, either removing it, uninstalling it, or just going around it and not even doing anything on that system and looking for systems that do not have an agent installed in it, right? So that becomes very important, and getting that visibility across systems where you do not have that visibility. So moving into that, right? So the challenge that what gap, the specific gap that NDR solving is specifically that, right? That visibility gap internally in the environment across both east-west traffic and when an adversary is moving specific data to their own infrastructure, specifically the north-south traffic, both of them, right? So it's very important to kind of understand this capability, because then it kind of completes the entire picture when you look at both the SIEM, the endpoint detection response, and the NDR solution. And only when you have the NDR solution, you're starting to now get that full visibility gap. And many times, we're also finding that if many organizations that do not have one or the other, they may start to default to NDR solutions, where because it's kind of giving them that capability immediately without having much of a lift, because there is no further deployment other than just getting that installed and not having to worry about installing further agents on their systems. So moving into Gigamon Threat Insight, right, I'll get into that in a minute, but again, kind of talking through these challenges, I think it's really important to kind of note, right, and the SOCs have this need of visibility, right? That's one of the reasons where they're not as effective. And these are reports, coming from Ponyman Institute. And if you look at this, right, there's other things here as well that you should be aware of. 84% of SOC analysts report the minimization of false positives, meaning that they're constantly, most of their effort has gone into deprioritizing alerts, because they may have alerts, but then what ends up happening is that they're not real alerts or they're false positives. So most of their work goes into essentially weeding out all of the things that are not true and then going after the things that are true. And then the other one is essentially then tuning and maintaining all of the updates and security tools that they have. So then how much time do they really have to actually do the actual work, right? They don't have a lot of time. And what ends up happening is that there's SOC burnout. Another true story kind of share with you, working at an MSSP provider in my prior life, found that, kind of understanding how the SOC actually operates and sitting with the SOC and understanding how much time they have. Typically, many of the MSSPs or MDR providers, they don't have a lot of time to actually do analysis on every alert, because guess what? They're getting thousands of alerts per day. And even in any organization, you may be up against it as well if you have your own security operations center, and say if you have even a few folks that are in a shift, right? If you have 3 shifts a day and they're seeing thousands of alerts a day, say even hundreds of alerts a day, that only leaves them with a few minutes to actually triage an alert and move to the next one, right? So that it's pretty obvious that they will burn out, because they just don't have enough hours or minutes in the day to truly assess the alert and understand if it's good or bad, right? And that becomes extremely important. So if you look at Threat Insight and our guided SaaS NDR, I thought it's important to kind of show how we align to the attack matrix, right? So as everyone evolves and understands their maturity, it's really important to kind of address and how Threat Insight guided SaaS maps to the MITRE attack matrix. So as you can see here, right, any of the blues or dark blues map back to our solution specifically. That kind of shows where, you have detections and coverage across the board all the way through impact stage. So regardless of where the attacker is in their stages, with the Threat Insight solution, you can actually get detection and coverage and feel good about the protection that you're getting. Let's take a look at some market options, right? So if you kind of look at the NDR market today, mainly most NDRs will provide you a way to actually optimize your environment and actually give you a full solution where you can leverage your team's skill sets, right? So if you've got security responders or cybersecurity analysts or guys that are just really interested in really getting all the details they need in the visibility, well, the NDR solution gives them that visibility and really, really enables them, right? Because you've got full control of the solution, and you've got the capability to do what you need to do to respond. However, where it falls short is basically you still have need to deploy the solution, there's other post-deployment work that may come about, right? You may have to do further tuning to make sure that the system is optimal, and there's other items that may come up afterwards. Say, for example, storage. If you have a ton of metadata or, say, PCAPs that you want to store, there may be other surprises and other strings on the team to be actually managed and keep up with the additional costs with that. In addition to that, you're still kind of left in the dark, right? Because if you are up against an incident and you are seeing something, who do you call to? If that happens? It's basically you or your own team have to kind of figure it out on your own and do your own research and hope for the best. As you move into the managed detection and response model or the MSSP model, you can certainly go that route or actually augment as well there, right? And you get that deployment work handled from the MSSP and DR side. You have the known cost parameters and you know what you're paying. And then you also have this larger crowdsourced view of what they are seeing, right? It's not just about your environment, but they may also have access to tens or hundreds of other environments, so they could be ahead of a specific campaign or adversarial attack that may be occurring. However, that also comes with the drawbacks, of course, right? You've got this one-size-fits-all platform, and they'll only have generic detections and remediation strategies, as well as over-reliance. All of a sudden, you might be relying on their teams to kind of help you with your response. So what if you can kind of get both, right? What if you had a solution where you could actually have the, allowing you to optimize your environment. You have the low cost barriers and deployment models. You've got the known cost parameters. You can have your full response capability and also the threat intel view across numerous different customers. But in addition to that, also have actual information security analysts, incident responders, threat researchers that actually have the expertise to help you along the way in your journey. And if something was to happen, and if you are up against an incident, you actually have someone that you can talk to and call into and actually get the advice when it actually matters, right? And that becomes really important. So, main thing here is essentially Threat Insight actually provides those capabilities. You get the across the board from implementation to operational management maintenance, and also the further advisory guidance services. Typically, you have to actually pay for those type of stuff. And again, coming from that side, I know for a fact that it becomes very expensive, right? When you kind of group in together a NDR solution along with any type of services, whether it's implementation work or it's actual operational work or it's actual incident response work, especially, that's when things get really, really expensive. So I can't really, it's hard to kind of talk about our team's expertise other than just kind of saying that, hey, they're great. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of just provide some links to our Gigamon blog, which has some amazing specific articles that are typically written about a weekly basis, sometimes even more. But really, really good articles written by our security researchers, as well as guys that have actually been in the trenches and done incident response work as well, hunting, et cetera. So definitely recommend that you check this out and look at the blog, check out some articles that are very relevant to today's attack landscape. And providing you some great depth of information around not just attack landscape, but also other areas where we could help when it comes to both, reporting of security operations, of how to use NDR solutions in general, or also just latest attacks that might been occurred in our assessment of them, or what you could do to level up your team and organization to kind of help you when you're up against specific attacks. Lastly, I'll kind of end with saying that our team is really passionate, and really the entire Threat Insight team here at Gigamon, it's really in our DNA. Cybersecurity is a huge deal for us, and it really is because that we just really, really enjoy and love finding the adversary, finding evil, solving crime and really protecting our customers. So kind of with that, I'll kind of end that, and I really appreciate everyone's time here.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation. Thank you for sharing the blog resources there. If anyone wants to check those out, you can click right on the link on the screen, and that will take you into the blog. But we're going to go ahead and move on to a poll for everyone out there on the call. And the question on the screen is, what additional information would you like about the Gigamon solution? And we'll just leave that up while we take your questions. So lots of good questions coming in. We appreciate those. If you have a question about the Gigamon solution, now's the time to get it in. Let's see. If I ask first question I wanted to ask you is, it's about agents. What's Gigamon's take on agents versus not using agents, and does Gigamon use agents?
Yeah, sure. So we don't, right? So because we are a network detection and response solution, we don't need an agent on the endpoint. Essentially, it's sensors. So the sensors get installed whether they're in the network to detect east and west traffic or north and south. We recommend obviously having both to get that full visibility. But that's the key thing there is once those sensors are installed, then we're capturing packet capture. We're actually capturing metadata and also allow you to do packet capture on demand as needed to get all the visibility that the customer needs.
Oh, good. Okay. I like that. Another question here, they're asking, how does the solution deal with white noise and false positives?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things for us is, I mentioned, right, that we have TSMs, which are technical success managers, as well as our ATR team, our applied threat research team, that essentially goes in and as we are collecting this network metadata on the wire, we're making observations, but then we're not just making those observations and bubbling those up as alerts. We're going a step deeper and doing further analysis. So we use numerous different intelligence data feeds, as well as our own proprietary intelligence, and then also create rules, detection rules, and then also use various different models between both machine learning and artificial intelligence, et cetera. But then also we do prototyping and actually play out attacks and carry out attacks and understand what is out there in the wild, and then create those detections that way. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all type of thing. We kind of address it from all angles, making sure that we can provide the best detection for our customers.
Smart. Nice. Let's see, another question they're asking, can this give me visibility and analytics across the hybrid cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually support, all the major cloud providers. So we can have, whether it's an Amazon machine image or other soft appliances or virtual appliances, across the board in Amazon, in Google, in Microsoft. And if you needed to, you can do hard appliances or virtual appliances in your own data centers. So obviously, coming from the security side of things, always will say I recommend having visibility across both cloud and internal networks, and really addressing the hybrid cloud challenges that any of the customers may have.
Excellent. And then I like this question from Scott, who's asking, what are some bottlenecks you find in getting executive buy-in for a solution like Gigamon? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically, what ends up having, NDR is, even though it's been around for quite some time, it's still fairly new. The terminology is new, but the whole practice of network security monitoring and network traffic analysis has been around for many, many years. But again, it becomes many times it becomes an augmentation type of thing where it becomes hard. What I would recommend typically is if there's any antiquated solutions that you may have, I'm not saying maybe not antiquated, but maybe that's not the right word, but typically if you have an IDS solution or an IPS solution or any types of solutions that are network-based solutions or even PCAP solutions, we can definitely kind of work with customers on that side. And definitely these could be very good conversations to have around possible replacements even when you're looking at those solutions, because this is really the next stage in customer evolution is moving towards NDR types of solutions that may not be providing everything that they wanted with like a typical standard IDS or IPS type of solution.
Absolutely, yeah, that's great advice. I like that. I like that approach, that entry point there. All right, well, Fayaz, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A session. There's a number of more technical questions there for you in the electronic queue. A great presentation. Thanks for being on the Megacast today.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I want to remind everyone to respond there to the poll. We want to hear your feedback on that. I'll leave that up while I announce our first prize winners. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to Jen Jones from Missouri. And our first of the grand prizes for drone going to Steve Drimones from New Jersey. Congratulations, Steve Drimones. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, from New Jersey. Congratulations. All right. And thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. It's now time for our next presentation on today's Cloud Security Megacast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Matt Dove, Sales Engineer at Rubric. Matt, thanks for being on.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, we'll take it away.
All right. So kind of looking at what we're trying to do here today, I think what we wanted to focus on is enhancing again, the security posture across your private, public, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment. And one of the things that Rubric does from a cloud data management perspective, I think, is really extend well into that process. What we see right now, oftentimes in our ecosystem of partners and prospects and customers, are really three things that come top of mind when you start talking about the sprawling data center, right, within multiple clouds. Cyber resiliency, right? So ransomware remediation. I don't think you can turn on your computer in the morning without seeing 3 updates about something like that. So how to build a platform that focuses on cloud security and data security and be resilient to one of these events. The underpinning of that being a backup and recovery strategy, I think that is cost efficient, right? So it's insurance, but on some level you're not going to pay 10 times the insurance that you did yesterday, right? Even for a better solution. So making that a cost efficient strategy. And then within these multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environments, de-risking that journey, like wherever you are within your status, whether you're just trying to get into figuring out what to do in the cloud or whether you're trying to get momentum to get there. So kind of de-risking that from a perspective. So what Rubric kind of does within this, it's really a zero trust data management platform that starts in the bottom tier, right? Your kind of traditional on-prem data center, all the different data sources that we can talk about. We've extended that into the public clouds, all the major public cloud providers. And then we've put a policy framework in place that it has an immutable file system, allows you to kind of really have that logically air-gapped data set of your production environment. Policy-based protection strategies, so you're not scheduling jobs, you're trying to eliminate the manual intervention that you have to go through to maintain data protection. Do things like detect anomaly, right? Not just detect high change rates and things like that, but actually look at the data set and tell you what's happening at your data set level, and then really kind of extend application recovery, be able to recover that quickly. So from that perspective, if you look at kind of like the traditional environment, the legacy backup where you have agents and proxies and servers and data movers pushing data onto storage, there's a lot of complex parts there that take a lot of man hours to go ahead and then manage it and maintain it and always know about it. We kind of wrap that up into a single view for cloud data management where we can push data across all the different tiers and give you one kind of cohesive data protection strategy that blends across all of the management layers of this multi-cloud environment. And then we do that from a zero trust perspective, right, where we orchestrate that, but we do it from a manner where we can really kind of lock down the access to the data. So modern data protection strategy, you have a bunch of different pieces here. We kind of collapse that into one hyper-converged appliance. We've eliminated a lot of the legacy architecture pieces and accelerating the recovery, the ability for us to then automate and kind of procedurally at scale recover the data set that you care about. Again, with our kind of approach with SLA policy-based information, and then eliminating the renewals, right? Eliminating all these different siloed, different tiers and different tool sets that you'll have for each different unique data set that might be in a different cloud. So again, the idea of a cost-efficient approach to that with Rubric. So big threat right now, cybersecurity event. You get a ransomware attack. It locks down your data set. So you have to figure out, well, what am I going to do? What's my approach? So I pay the ransom, which nobody really wants to do, so I attempt to recover it. It's probably your first option. So you engage like your SecOps and IT ops teams to go ahead and try to identify what happened. Can I do a restore? Were the backups compromised? You pay the ransom. If they weren't compromised and you can actually do the restore, well, then you have that secondary day two operation piece. What do I recover? How far back in time do I go to recover it? So there's a lot of complexity with trying to identify what to do inside of a cyber event, and all of this is on the fly. These procedures are generally not predefined, not very well at least. So our kind of extension is to take the principles of data protection that matter, air-gapped data, immutable file system, zero trust architecture, and we kind of focus on the sweet spot, right? Logical backups offline, logically air-gapped data set. It cannot be edited. We wrote our own file system that's immutable in format, and zero trust, right? We don't assume anything has the right to actually access or control data sets unless it's a certificate-based mutual authentication call. So our approach then allows you to kind of really focus security at the data point. We are not endpoint protection. We are not a security tool set. We're really the backup safeguard. So what we're going to do is, hey, the ransomware happened. Can you recover? Well, you engage your SecOps team, and what we're going to really do is our backups are safeguarded because they're immutable in first touch. We then scope the attack for you. We have a SaaS offering that tells you specifically down to the file if entropes or other items have happened. And then what we do is focus on how do we go ahead and deliver that out and recover that fast in an automated and orchestrated fashion. So it's really a different approach altogether to data protection with data security as its underpinning. Everything done from the perspective of a SaaS offering, so we don't want to impact your production workloads to do this. It's all done from the backup estate, right? So that's a pretty significant little piece for us.
What it looks like to have a multi-cloud strategy and the security around it, a little bit what we're seeing out in the marketplace. And now what I want to do is actually show you what it looks like to have a single strategy that focuses on data security, that focuses on providing a secure platform to ingest your data, that focuses on the ability of a better backup solution, take workload off your team's plate, have one team be able to control a consistent data protection strategy across the multitudes of clouds and workload locations that you have, and also do it in a cyber resilient manner, a way that in case the four walls of your data center break down, in case you have an event, which is more and more likely every day, that you have the ability to guarantee your recoverability of all your sensitive data, all the data that matters to your environment. What that looks like from our perspective is we have this global view. It starts with the ability for us to kind of give you information around on-premise workloads, cloud-based workloads, SaaS offerings, M365, things of that nature. And what I want to do is just showcase how we start moving data, right? The first thing that we're going to do is look at GPS, which is kind of our ability to look at all workloads in all environments. So I'm going to focus first on clusters. Clusters are on-premise workloads for us, right? So we have 10 data centers to look at here that are all over Johannesburg and Mumbai and Los Angeles. So all your physical on-premise environments, where your data resides in your physical presence that matters to you, I want to focus on one, AMER Rubric 1. On that environment, it starts with better backup. We're going to talk about security and security posture across multi-cloud, but it all starts with having a secure framework for a better backup platform. The secure plan for having our own immutable file system that as we ingest the data set is now immune from a cyber event from happening. How do we help you adopt a cloud journey if you haven't already started one? The first piece is getting your data to a cloud, right? It takes about 5 minutes to set up an archival location for us. We support all of the major cloud providers. Some smaller cloud environments just needs to be S3 compatible. So you choose the cloud that you want to move into. You want to start dipping your toe in the water if you don't already have a defined strategy. We get your data out there. We get your data out there from an automated protection policy perspective. We're going to let you do something like take a policy instead of you having to create all the different workloads and jobs and scheduling things to move from one location to another. What we're going to simply do is create policy-based protection strategy. Continuous data protection. Do you want it? Do you want a sub 1 minute RPO recovery point for very critical workloads? You enable it. It's a checkbox. You don't need it for that. It's a less critical workload. You disable it. You start with the base frequency and the base retention of everything that you want to recover, right? It's about base frequency. How often am I taking the snapshot? Retention. How long do I want to keep each one of those base frequencies? And the next is now the lifecycle management of where it resides inside that, in this case, 3-year piece. I don't want to keep data forever, right? I want to be able to do a mass recovery at scale for fast impacted data. You recover data sets from short periods of time to go 30 days. I'll keep it on-prem. I'm going to send it to a second site for a DR event, keep it there for 14 days. You know, I don't need to recover in a DR event generally from more than a couple of days, but I'll keep it there for 14 days. But I also need to make sure I can recover data for the entire duration of time that I'm talking about. Well, let's use cloud storage. I'm going to instantly send this out to the default tier, in this case of Azure, right? I can send it directly out to the archive tier if you'd want. We also support, again, if we go to like an AWS policy, you can send it to the default storage class. You can send it out to Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive. You can really start driving down operational costs. You want a cost-efficient data management platform. In addition, now we've simplified getting that policy-based assignment, creating a protection strategy that gets your data off to the cloud. To deploy it, you can do it at any level. Virtualized environments, you get a very quick look at what the workload is, what the protection strategy is, whether it was derived from a higher level tag, you know, making sure that the child objects always have the same protection policies, or whether it's directly assigned. The idea is you never have a miss. We support all the main hypervisors. We support physical workloads in your data center, NAS shares, SQL, and Oracle, whatever database platforms you have. The idea that you never have a miss, it's an automated deployment strategy that automatically finds new data and assigns a policy to it, because it's a set and forget kind of a model. The key part, as soon as we touch the data, it's immutable. You can't be impacted by that cyber event. Well, that's great. Everything is also automated. Everything is an API call down to this UI. There's no software. You're not managing an application, pointing data to a database. You're managing an API call to an appliance. These API calls are well established. We have entire code banks that you can lift and adapt into your environment to simplify all of the day 2 operations. So it's better backup. That's secure, underpinning of security. So now I have a better backup platform strategy. I have a way to manage better backup for all of my on-premise environments. It doesn't help me in multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. That's on-premise. So hybrid cloud looks like inventory, right? I have SaaS offerings. I have AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, all these different cloud environments that I have workloads in. It's the same strategy. I take an SLA-based policy assignment. I choose an application or a web service that I want to go ahead and back up. And I have the same exact strategy about how often and how long. Right, so I take a backup every day for a month. I have extended retention on some of it. Where do I want it to sit within that entire time? Do I want to replicate it to a secondary AWS region or Azure region? You can choose that. How long do you want it to sit in that second region? And then do I want to do log backups? You know, something very simple. Now the idea is I have a exactly similar process to what I've done on-premise for SQL and VMware and Hyper-V, AHV, Oracle. I've extended that out to the cloud. I've given you the exact same protection strategy, protection tool set, whether it's an on-premise or a cloud-native workload. So that's great. How do I apply it? Same exact concept. At any one of these cloud inventories, I can go to, and I can make, we're going to use the native terminology from the platform and allow you to make an assignment at any level of it. AWS, I can go to Azure. Looks a little bit different, but it's the same general construct: subscriptions, resource groups, tag rules, the things that those cloud native providers allow us to assign protection policies to. So now I have SLA policies, a secure platform to ingest the data that's immune from ransomware, that has a consistent data protection policy across all of your multi-cloud environments. The last thing I want to do then is talk about, well, cyber resiliency. You know, we'd address cyber resiliency a lot within the environment. I want to be able to recover from a ransomware event. Right? If something happens, I need to be able to identify it and recover quickly. Well, phase one is your backup's immutable. You're guaranteed to be able to recover. Phase two is we need to help you do it quickly. We're not looking for things like high levels of change in last night's backup, right? A big incremental backup is just a big incremental backup. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a ransomware event. We want to do things like what happened. Here it's high confidence and high levels of encryption. We're going to let you look down into the actual snapshot and browse down what was impacted. When we detect the anomalous behavior, we're going to look at it. We're going to see what's inside of that anomalous behavior set and tell you all the way down to an individual file, what was impacted, what happened, let you filter out to the noise so you can focus on just the impacted data. We're not scanning for malware. We're not looking for virus signatures or ransomware signatures. Some of those are day zero, they don't help. What we're doing is detecting anomalous behavior because we're looking at your data from today and comparing it to yesterday, this Monday to last Monday, and we're identifying behaviors that are abnormal and alerting you to it and telling you why we think it's abnormal. This is not something that typically happens. Then you go ahead and choose whatever it is that you need to recover, whether it's 1 or 10 different workloads that were impacted, and you hit recover. This is now where you start really driving down a recovery time on a cyber event. If you have 100 terabytes of front-end data that we're protecting, you don't have 100 terabytes of data typically impacted by a cyber event. You might have 10, 20, 30. But it's identifying the blast radius that matters. We've just shown you very easily, you can go down to an individual file. You can now automate the recovery at scale in whatever method you see fit. And when you hit recover, it just makes a call back down to the appliance to start actually recovering all those jobs and all those functions to the point in time you've chosen. You're not rolling back 30 days. You're recovering the specified file sets that were impacted, the specified VMs or shares, and you're recovering them back to a specified time that we know is when the data changed. Now, next piece, that's great. We identified what data was impacted, we recovered it, it looks awesome, but now you have the post-mortem, right? You're up and running, the business is functioning, and now you have to answer the question, what was impacted? So the next piece is then, what was inside the data set that was impacted by the ransomware event? And that's where we then start giving you the intelligence around what types of data, sensitive data that you have. It can be canned things like, driver's license and bank routing. They can be custom items like customer IDs within your organization, employee IDs. You create analyzers, you put them in policies, and you scan your data. And what we then do give you back is a very granular look at how many files have sensitive data in it, how many sensitive data hits are in those files. Do you have any files that have open access, meaning I have sensitive data in it and I don't have proper security controls around the share? So what kinds of things, what kind of intelligence can I do? And all of this is a SaaS offering. It's a checkbox. There's zero deployment of agents and proxies. It's a zero lift deployment from an infrastructure perspective, and there's zero impact on production environment. You're not doing things that are impacting your hypervisors and your physical workloads out there, and you're not spinning up more infrastructure to look at this. It's all done off the backup state. So at a high level, that's what we wanted to focus on. How do we deliver a consistent strategy for on-prem, public cloud, hybrid cloud? It has to have an underpinning of security. It has to have a zero trust architecture. It has to be able to deliver a cyber resilient offering, and you have to do it in a way that's cost effective. So that's what we wanted to focus on today. Thank you for your time.
Great presentation, Matt. Really cool to see that demo. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have some questions for you from the audience if you're ready.
I am ready.
Awesome. All right. Well, I just brought up a poll question for everyone out there. I want to remind everyone about what additional information would you like about the Rubric solution. We'll leave that up for your response while we take your questions. Here's a question from Scott, Matt, who wants to know, how can I ensure that once my backup data is written, that it can never be changed?
We do that specifically. We wrote our own file system. It's a Debian-based operating system. We've actually eliminated the edit and modify commands. So the only thing that you can do is append. So as we commit our data to disk, we actually abstract it through an append-only file format. So any data that's been committed to disk is a full strike write in a new set of blocks. So we do that effectively at our own OS level within our hyper-converged appliance.
Excellent. I like that. And then Jacob's asking, what are some ways to ensure that the recovery plan is going to be successful? How do you know that you can really recover?
So one of the things that we didn't touch on is this kind of concept of app flows, where you can create a run book about the recovery and test it in isolation. We also have a way for you to script anything, right? Everything that we're doing is an API call, so it does allow you to do things like run a script that can test a database refresh or a VMware or Hyper-V or any kind of workload recovery into a second site. But we also then have that built into that global dashboard view, that app flows, the ability to recover into an alternate site and do that in isolation.
Very nice. Yeah, it's good to know, to have confidence in that recovery. Let's see, Garrett, or let's see, Guy is asking, how would Rubric protect our Kubernetes environment?
So we have a Kubernetes native application actually that we just started deploying in 6.0, the newest version of our software, where we can do things like backup and maintain the Kubernetes instances that you have on premise. There are tie-ins, there are white papers that we can provide as well around kind of our functionality around that. That is a new strategy for us, and it's actually just came on the market a couple weeks ago.
Nice. Very nice. Another question they're asking, what about protecting data in SaaS applications like Office 365 or Microsoft 365?
So Microsoft 365 was one of those SaaS offerings. I didn't dive into it today, but we have full integration with Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. And how we do that, we can do it two different ways. One, if you would like an air-gapped version of your storage, we actually have a hosted storage piece where we'll make an authorization into your tenant API call that snaps the data and stores it into our storage account. That way you have a completely air-gapped storage from your internal user base. So again, think cyber event with password security. The other way is for you to bring your own storage, where it's just a license feature. Again, we create a service principal inside your M365 account to orchestrate all the backups. We spin up a Kubernetes instance to then index all the data, and all the data is stored in your associated blob storage account. So you can do it either way, bring your own storage or with us. You can index every item. And one of the key features there is that recovery option is done outside of the licensing, right? So your users can go up and down. If you have a lot of turnover, you still have the ability to recover data from a user that is now a relic user for your organization.
Excellent. And then there's a couple questions here kind of around ransomware. Like, how do I know that the ransomware didn't encrypt my backup data as well? And how do I know when I go to restore, if I have a ransomware attack, how do I know that I'm not just restoring files that are already infected? A few questions around that.
So the first piece is our platform, the actual Rubric platform, is immune from being encrypted. And we kind of talked about that a little bit with the append-only file format. Since we're never writing data in native source file format, whatever ransomware event has happened, if we ingest it onto the platform, it doesn't have lateral movement, right? It's been encrypted and sent to our disk. So it doesn't have the ability to burn down your recovery times. The second part is we integrate with other pieces. We are not a security tool, right? So today we have lots of different vendors on here today that can talk to you about the forensics of what happened, what was the actual ransomware signature, and all of those other tool sets can help you identify the actual hash, the things that have been edited. Our ability to recover, you can recover in isolation, so you can actually search for things like affected hashes within specific files that some of these security vendors that are actually focused on security can tell you about.
Excellent. Steven's asking, what does a restore look like? Like, what's the general process for restoring? You want to talk about recovery a little bit?
Sure. A recovery effort for us is, within our platform, it's a global, search query. So you type in the information that you're trying to recover, whether that's an email in M365, a subject, or whether it's a VM or a database on an on-premise environment. We identify, hey, this is everything we've done because we index every file and every bit of information that we ingest. You then get a card. The card tells you everything that you need to know about this. You can choose the point in time that you want to recover to. The recovery workflow then becomes optional for you, depending on what it is. We can do a live mount, where we're taking a database and presenting it as an SMB share. We can do an instant recovery of an entire VM. You can recover one single file of a VM back to production, an LM host file. So the recovery workflow becomes very simple, but each one is a little bit different depending on whether it's a database or it's an individual file, whether it's a physical server or a NAS share.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see where that would be different depending on what you're recovering. This is a good question. What about RPO and RTO? Do we have any idea ahead of time of what that would be?
Yeah, the RPO is 100% a function of what your business wants the RPO to be for that data set, right? You value the data. I don't want to have more than a 4-hour gap of time. So you define your RPO. Where Rubric assists is driving the RTO down to near zero, right? So for a database, I can have a database spun up from a point in time that you've chosen and presented for you to write queries against inside of 2 minutes. So your RTO is approaching, sub 1 minute time. A VM, I can live mount in sub 1 minute because it's just promoting that backup from my storage into your compute environment, right? So these are all things that can be near instantaneous. For the ransomware piece, that's what that kind of orchestrated call is. Driving the RTO down means minimizing how much data I need to recover and then automating the recovery. You're not kicking off 50 different restore jobs. You're choosing the data that was impacted and hitting go, and then we do the orchestration from an automated fashion behind you. So RPO is completely in your control. RTO is what we control at Rubric, and we drive that close to zero with the automation processes around the recovery workflows.
Excellent. And then I know we've covered this. You talked about the append-only file system, but maybe we want to shape the answer a little differently because there's still a couple questions out here about it. They want to know any advice on making the backup files write protected. That's the immutable backup? That's the append-only file system, right?
Yeah, and one other way to shape it differently, I'd say, is how we ingest data. Right, so we are not a storage tier that you have data movers pushing data onto like a SMB share or an open protocol. We are a closed hardened appliance. There's no scannable protocols in the appliance. Every data fetch is initiated by an RPC command from our cluster. So we reach out and grab the data. We bring it on an encrypted format. There are no scannable protocols on the appliance itself, but then prior to data being committed to disk, we abstract the data. And we extract that through a layer that then, as we commit it, it is now impossible to edit. We also have SLA retention lock, so you can actually protect yourself against like rogue admin, as well as kind of the ransomware, the ability that nothing can edit and impact the data that's on our appliance.
Nice. All right. Well, Matt, I'm afraid that's all the time we have here in our live Q&A. There's a number of more technical questions for you there in the electronic queue. But really great presentation and cool demo. Thanks for being on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
For more information on Rubric, check out the handout that's available there for download in your audience console. It's actually a link that will take you to the Rubric Live event. You can save your seat on those the upcoming series of Rubric Live events. So make sure that you check those out to see Rubric in action. All right, and with that, it's now time for our next prize announcement. We have another Amazon $500 gift card, this one going to Corey Burns from Wisconsin. Congratulations, Corey Burns from Wisconsin. All right, and with that, it's now time for our next set of presenters on today's Megacast. Welcome Mr. Jason Burns, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Nutanix, and Stephen Riley, Partner Engineer Lead for Technology Partnerships at Palo Alto Networks. Jason and Stephen, I'm going to hand it off to you now. Take it away.
Thanks, David, for that introduction. It's great to be here today with Jason, and we're going to cover off on enhancing your public, private, and hybrid cloud security posture. This is a great segue into some of the deeper components that we have today for you to discuss around the emergence of our integration with Nutanix. But first of all, before we get into that, let's have a bit of a discussion around hyperconvergence, what that means, and what's actually going on in a lot of people's environments today. If we take our look at the hyper-converged infrastructure market, for example, we know data is basically being placed in many different locations, right? We've got our data centers becoming increasingly distributed. We've got new technologies that are being introduced, especially in the CI/CD type of environment. In other words, continuous integration and delivery. That sort of concept where you're deploying applications time and time again in the cloud, localized, inside your big data centers as well, basically opening up the ability to drive and deliver workloads across entire environments. So this is a very interesting area that's changing at a very rapid rate. And we know that a lot of organizations are moving to the cloud rapidly too. So as this environment changes and is modified, we need to kind of keep up with that. If we look at what hyper-converged infrastructure is, we see that it simply simplifies the virtualization of all this storage infrastructure that we have currently in data centers, typically. We know that's moving to a more cloud-based environment as well, which means that as we do that, as we abstract our servers, abstract our storage networks, and abstract our systems in general into more virtualized environments, we are starting to think through how we actually monitor and manage those. And we're starting to see workloads are starting to go from on-premise to off-premise to remote sites. We're seeing workloads in many different locations. And so it's starting to become more and more important to validate and understand what's happening inside your network from an infrastructure perspective, and understanding the flows of communications between all points, usually at layer 7, the application layer. And that's becoming more and more important and intrinsic to how we actually look at our networking and the infrastructure there. So let's take a quick look at this sort of communication or interconnectivity and the lack of seeing into what's actually going on within inside your environments today, which often leads to breaches in these environments. And why is that? It's generally because of the complexity, right? We just stated that we see workloads moving across data centers, moving across large cloud-based infrastructure, and sometimes multiple clouds, right? In fact, I dare say most industry, we see multiple clouds attached to one company, and not just, one company has one cloud provider. So this sort of movement and the ability to open up more breaches is becoming more and more prevalent. So if we start looking at our infrastructure and data centers and how they're evolving and introducing new technologies, we see that applications can span between the hybrid cloud in Amazon, for example, or Microsoft Azure, to a traditional data center, or it could be spread across multiple locations or branches. And this, of course, generates traffic. And what sort of traffic? Well, generally it's east-west traffic, right? And what do we mean by east-west traffic? Well, in a flat network, east-west traffic would be traffic traveling from one campus to another campus, or from one floor to another floor. And that traffic isn't necessarily going out to the internet as per se, right? So it's generally not going through a firewall in a data center in one centralized location. The traffic's really traveling around the network, being unmonitored generally. And this becomes a bit of a problem. Take, for instance, at Palo Alto Networks, we have 3 large buildings on our main campus, and each building has 6 to 7 floors with literally thousands of people on each floor. If there was an outbreak, a malicious outbreak, for example, on one of those floors, it would be very simple for an attacker to start traversing floors without any monitoring. And then if you want to extend that, they could start traversing from one building to the next building. This, in essence, is what happens in east-west traffic flows, where a malicious attacker takes hold of a beachhead or location in your network to start traversing that network and start looking at weak spots. And attackers know this, and they exploit this regularly. If we look at many environments, we see that you have an external attacker. And just as a side note, we see from many Ponin reports that majority, and I would say close to well above 90% of all large enterprises have some sort of an external attacker inside their environment today. They're looking to penetrate the network in different locations. Now, that penetration might happen through some form of drive-by, some sort of phishing attack, some sort of social attack. Usually it's in a PDF or something like that. And once they're in, they start moving laterally, right? They start looking for different occurrences or places where that person is trying to advance in the, where that person's trying to, say, gain access to an HR system or something like that. You'll find that attackers will leverage the fact that that user or that administrator has access or is accessing certain components within inside the network. And they'll try and use that to create other beachheads throughout the network. So they have multiple places to go. And one thing that actually occurs that not a lot of people are aware of is that it actually beacons on the network. And what does that mean? It actually, most malware is trying to get back to some sort of control, or CNC server, control and command server, right? And that server tells that particular client what to do. And often that might be a scan of your network across all the ports. Generally speaking, they're looking for applications or unpatched environments. And we know unpatched environments are I think last year's report was over 25% of attacks that gained entry into networks were due simply because of unpatched environments. So the simple things that we have that we're not monitoring, that we're not looking, we just assume our network's safe internally, but generally speaking, it's not. And once in, they start executing and they start pulling back data and pulling back information from your infrastructure. In fact, just the other day, we hear that T-Mobile had a 40 million people incident of data going out the door. That's a big number. And it's going to hit T-Mobile in some way. People don't appreciate their data being lost. And there's obviously HIPAA compliance as well. So different verticals have different rules around what actually happens when those things occur. And they can be nasty fines. In fact, I think a few years back, Citi received an $80 million fine for exposure. And that exposure led to some firings internally, but also led to, was actually the result of an unpatched system in the cloud, no less. So again, that's east-west traffic. And it kind of explains and shows that, all of us are exposed in some way, shape, and form. So if we look at it, a typical perimeter next generation firewall provides a really good, visibility into understanding what's going to happen between these particular infrastructure components. So if we look at VMs, hardware, we look at what's going on in the data center, multiple clouds, single clouds, generally speaking, north-south traffic flows. We have some sort of firewall in place, which is a typical infrastructure design. Usually it's in the big data center. Everybody goes in that firewall, everyone goes out of that firewall. But you see these question marks, it's, well, what's going between these environments? How do we start capturing that information and really understanding what's going on in the environment? It takes a bit of time to actually gain visibility into what that looks like. But there's a few methods that we can apply to move to an environment that's a lot more secure. And one of those methods would be applying something like micro-segmentation. And if microsegmentation is new to you, you can ask the question, well, what is or why microsegmentation? The reality is we need to be able to understand the attack surface. We need to understand how to lock down breaches at a very rapid rate. And we need to apply those policies that we have inside our networking infrastructure back to the regulatory compliance. If I'm a HIPAA compliant or a PCI compliant marketing vertical, I need to make sure that I can show that I'm achieving the correct outcomes. And then it's about how do I streamline that so that I can manage ongoing operational processes. If you think back to our Palo Alto example of having multiple campuses or multiple buildings with floors on the buildings and thousands of people on each floor, we could, in theory, if we've applied correct principles with microsegmentation, just lock down that one floor. So if we know the attackers in one location, and we have, say, a new gen firewall between each location, then we have the ability to go, you know what, if we see this type of traffic, then make sure it doesn't traverse the network. In other words, we contain it to one floor instead of it moving from floor to floor or building to building. And that's the concept of micro segmentation. So it enables us to have, better visibility in the environment, better control over how we manage an implementation in, say, an HCI environment, or it allows us to reduce the attack surface through the segmentation itself. So if we think about an HCI environment where we've got a lot of virtualized machines running loads of different applications, how do we stop applications going from one machine to another machine? How do we control best practice in our organization? In some cases, like a lot of deployments that occur from an operational perspective, or even a development, a lot of companies develop their own products, for example. How do we ensure that the server that's housing the application only talks to this one database and doesn't talk to any other database? And only users coming from this location can access the application itself, the front-end service type component of that application. Those sort of things are really important, and we need to be clear on how that actually occurs. And that's where micro-segmentation and network flows and controlling how flow works inside an infrastructure definitely controls the overall process and monitoring and management of that. So let's look at what we've done with Nutanix and Palo Alto networks. Nutanix is one of the bigger HCI solution vendors, which essentially makes networking security easy by helping to manage the deployment of VMs, deployment of even our VM series from Palo Alto with a one-click type of process. It also helps you understand and visualize applications that are running inside that environment. And by applying the VM series, we can segment out and monitor some of the components that are inside the actual HCI environment. And flow service insertion, which Nutanix has the ability to do, means we can control how data is flowing between or from which server to what server inside your infrastructure. And it makes it more simplistic to manage because you've been given a more easier to manage interface. So you can simply see how that actually is applied. And with easy deployment of Nutanix Calm inside that infrastructure with their particular model, it means that all major virtualization platforms and cloud environments become more consistent in terms of deployment and communications. And this, in essence, helps prevent some of that east-west traffic sprawling all over your network. So it reduces the footprint by which an attacker can actually move around in your network. It actually means that we only allow flows to happen from one location to another location, with network monitoring happening with the new gen firewall from Palo Alto Networks, without providing additional complex hardware and other components. We simply contain that all in one infrastructure. So if we look at, perhaps how that would look or how that is, we see that you can look at layer 7, which is the application layer, and we can see that we are able to apply different policies to service insertion into the Nutanix flow, which allows for easier management of traffic flows in any direction inside that infrastructure. And the micro-segmentation concept is we lock down certain areas, keep certain areas or VMs to themselves, so that we only need these two VMs to communicate with one another. And Flow allows us to do that, and then allows the information, if it needs to flow out or flow to different locations inside that infrastructure, it can go through a VM series. And we can see at the application level what we're trying to access. And the new gen firewall from Palo Alto Networks provides threat protection, URL filtering, Wildfire, which looks at files, it looks at DNS filtering, and also has DLP capabilities to lock down certain files that as they come across, we can actually flag that. And that gives you more of a overall understanding of your environment, and from a monitoring perspective, but also automatically prevents certain exfiltration activities. It automatically prevents certain lateral movement and horizontal movement in your network, and it locks down an attacker to certain areas. And if we look at this diagram, you see, we could keep an attacker essentially in this orange area so that they couldn't get out, because we've defined communication between those two VMs, for example. And so there's a lot to be said about the integration from Palo Alto Networks and Nutanix and the simplicity of that. And think of Palo Alto as providing the security aspects, whereas Nutanix is providing the whole hyper-converged infrastructure service provisioning inside that infrastructure. So Nutanix is enabling you to simplistically manage your cloud type products, your server, your local products on VM series, or your VMs themselves, sorry, not VM series, the VMs themselves, any applications you've got deployed, deployment models, and simplifying that whole management process, and even simplifying the VM series deployment so that you can simply manage your security policies and profiles inside that infrastructure. So I'm going to hand some time over to Jason now, and Jason's going to just share some of his thoughts and ideas around these components too.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So you mentioned Nutanix Flow, and what I want to do is show how Flow provides microsegmentation. So if you look at the next slide, what we see is that the traditional perimeter security, as Steve mentioned, is kind of wide open except for at the border. So you could have traffic that flows east-west from VM to VM. And if you imagine all these virtual machines are provisioned on Nutanix AHV, what you get with Flow is a firewall that exists in front of every single VM. So that firewall allows you to place policies that say VMs in the same network shouldn't be able to talk to each other, or should only be able to talk on certain ports. So that can stop that threat of traffic spreading east to west with microseg and Flow. And Nutanix Calm helps you enhance that security by deploying that VM series firewall right on those AHV hosts. So in this example, we have Flow microsegmentation providing layer 3 and layer 4 microsegmentation for VMs. Nutanix Calm automating the deployment of the VM series, and then you can redirect specific traffic through that VM series firewall for extra inspection. So the benefits of that integration are that you get really one-click provisioning. So the Calm automation here says, here's a blueprint of how I want this system to look. Set it all up for me, and you don't have to worry about that deployment anymore. So no more manually deploying those firewalls on every host. The visibility here is that you can see the traffic happening east-west between VMs, and then any specific traffic you want, you could also redirect up to the VM series firewall for that advanced threat protection. One of the great things we've done recently is integrated management as well, so that the categories that we tag VMs with inside Nutanix AHV and Prism can be shared with Panorama. And that allows you to have visibility of the categories and IP mappings for use in your physical firewall through those DAGs inside Panorama. So it looks like your virtual firewalls in Nutanix and your physical firewalls have a similar management plane. They're sharing that data together. And what this means is that Nutanix and Palo Alto Networks give you the best-in-class security. So Nutanix has a high net promoter score averaged over the past 7 years, meaning you're going to have great support when you use Nutanix AHV. And we've been really a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant and Forrester Wave for hyperconvergence. So when you combine these solutions together, you're getting the best of Nutanix, and also Steve can talk about Palo Alto Networks.
Yeah, so we've been a leader in the Gartner Quadrant for some time, and our VM series new gen firewall is based on the Pan OS that we've had for the last 13, 14 years as an organization. And we've got well over 65,000 customers that have this deployed inside their infrastructure. And so we know we're one of the leaders in security, and it makes sense for a security leader to come together with Nutanix, who's also a leader in HCI market, and together provide an integration that's seamless, easy to use, that is able to expand inside your infrastructure and meet the IT needs as well as the network security needs of your environment. So with that, I guess we'll move on and just talk a little bit about that we have plenty of integration information out there. We're not expecting you to type down or write down all this information that's here on your screen, but we'll just point out that there's there's an actual tab with handouts inside your environment, and so look for that as you watch this presentation today. It was really good talking to everybody, and Jason, thanks again for joining us and representing Nutanix and sharing your thoughts and insights.
Jason, Stephen, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for being on the Megacast today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David.
All right, I just brought up the first of two polls. The poll on the screen we want to hear your feedback on is what best describes your microsegmentation strategy. Are you using physical firewalls at the north-south boundary only? Physical firewalls north-south and between VLANs? Virtual firewalls between VLANs? Or hypervisor-based microsegmentation in addition to one of the above? And thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll, and also thank you to everyone who posted the excellent questions. I am routing these to Jason and Stephen electronically. We don't have time for our usual live Q&A here. Just time for a couple of quick polls. So thank you to everyone who responded to that one. One more question here. That is, what additional information would you like about Nutanix and Palo Alto Networks? And I'll leave that up while I announce our next set of prize winners. So many great questions coming in, routing these to the Nutanix and Palo Alto team. Really good questions. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget about our best question prize as well. So smart to get these in if something's on your mind. All right, our next prize winners. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to Matthew Knapp from Texas. Congratulations. And our next grand prize for another drone. This one's going to Keaton Desai from Virginia. Congratulations. Matthew Knapp from Texas and Keaton Desai from Virginia. All right, thank you to everyone there who responded to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback on that. And with that, it's now time to introduce you to our next presenter on today's Megacast. I'm excited to introduce Somaya Carmali, Director of Product Management for Cloud Security at Crowdstrike. Somaya, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thanks for being on the Megacast today. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much for the nice introduction. Let me dive right into it. Okay, hopefully my content is visible and we're ready to go. So today I will be talking about how we do cloud security here at Crowdstrike. What are some of our key drivers for the product strategy, and then dive into our Cspm offering, which is called Falcon Horizon, right? By way of a quick agenda, I'm going to spend the next 15 to 17 minutes talking about, what does cloud security actually mean? What are the kinds of challenges that it presents? And what's our approach at Crowdstrike towards solving some of these challenges? We'll get into the specifics of the product and its value itself, and then I'll tie it back together with what we try to do overall at Crowdstrike with respect to cloud security and how we engage with our partners and customers. So with that, let me dive right in. Right. Now, as enterprises move into the cloud, whether it's like from an on-prem to a single or a multi-cloud environment, right? They see a lot of benefits, whether it's the ability to take advantage of newer technology, faster time to market, costs, whatever, right? But we're also seeing when we talk to our own customers, our partners, and our analysts that this presents a whole new set of challenges, right? For example, we have analysts talking about how almost all cloud security failures is going to be because of what they call the customer's fault because of misconfigurations on top of those services that we use from our cloud providers, right? There is regulatory impact, regulators, compliance, GRC. They're paying close attention to how cloud adoption is happening within enterprises, and they have a big stake in ensuring that this goes along with their recommendations, right? So in net, we're seeing that most organizations, right, they are realizing that whatever works for them in their data centers and their on-prem environments traditionally really does not work in cloud environments, right? And we all keep hearing about this notion that, hey, cloud is different. But really, what is different about the cloud, and how can we actually take advantage of some of the benefits that the cloud provides in order to keep it secure, right? So those are the kinds of things we think about at Crowdstrike, and that fuels our basic product strategy, right? So before I get into the product itself, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the thinking behind our own products, right? And why we think we're going to be good at this, right? As you know, we are the largest, EDR vendor in the market today. And the way we deliver our EDR solutions is based on a cloud delivered model, right? So today we protect one of the largest multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environments, right? And we are processing tons of events. We're up from this whole trillion number that you see on the slide here per week, right? And we're using all of this information, and we're sifting through that information to provide practical actions to our own customers, right? Based on all of the data that we're seeing, that's how we are able to detect behavioral anomalies in the cloud. We're able to correlate all sorts of data, whether it's threat intel information, control plane information, runtime information. We're able to consolidate and correlate all of that, right? We're also very adversary focused as a company, and we're bringing that same DNA into the cloud because it's easy for for adversaries to exploit some of these misconfigurations, right? Because, like a S3 bucket is just publicly open to the internet, right? It might be hard to find, right? It's hard to find for both, enterprise security teams as well as adversaries, but, once the adversary finds it, it's easy for them to exploit, exfiltrate data, and cause damage, right? So we're coming from that perspective, right? It's not just about having misconfigurations as a challenge. You have adversaries who are trying to exploit these misconfigurations as a huge challenge that we need to address, right? And how do we do that, right? And what is the value that we provide? And, at the core of it, we're looking at all the products that Crowdstrike provides as coming from the same underlying platform. So even within cloud security, whether it's visibility and discovery, whether it's posture management, whether it's runtime protection, it's all part of the same platform, right? If we need an agent, there is the same agent that is available for things like security posture or behavior detection or discovery and visibility. We actually don't need an agent, so we're just based on the same platform and the same data set that's available across, say things like Intel or identity protection or, SecOps and our threat hunting services. What I will do in the next few minutes is focus on the cloud security posture management solution, right? We call that Falcon Horizon, and just walk you through some of the benefits and some examples of what we're working on, what we have just put in the hands of our customers. So, like I said, right, Falcon Horizon is our posture management solution, right? We're looking at this as a solution that will provide you visibility across multi-cloud environments. So whether you're on, AWS or Azure or GCP, you have a single place to see all your cloud assets, right? We're also enabling you to use this attack surface, right? So we'll show you the highest severity misconfigurations. We will ensure that your resources do not have a sprawl of misconfiguration, and at the same time, we're not, causing more alert fatigue, right? We want to enable security teams to focus on what matters and be able to go and address those issues in a timely fashion, right? Again, not just from misconfigurations, but we're also saying, hey, we know that adversaries are now exploiting the cloud more than ever, right? So we also have a threat hunting, threat detection, and control plane protection with our indicators of attack, just from looking at activities that are happening in the cloud, right? Again, compliance, regulatory requirements are part of the cloud adoption, and we help you maintain not just compliance but continuous compliance. So if there is things that are changing in your cloud and there's something that violates a certain policy, we'll immediately be able to detect and provide that. Right? We also focus on identity analysis and prevent identity-based threats, right? We're the only provider that looks at multi-cloud identities. So whether you're in AWS or Azure, we're able to figure out what user risk, application risk, roles and groups that's present in your environment at any given point in time, right? Anybody has privileged access, so on and so forth, right? And so it's a single platform that allows you to gain both visibility as well as compliance and manage your overall posture in the cloud. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to just double click into two areas which we think we're really good at, and we're seeing a lot of success with our customers. One of them is the control plane IOAs, and the other one is on identity. So what is a cloud indicator of attack, right? This is basically a way for us to detect and show customers that there is some activity that's happening in real time in the cloud. For example, somebody who might be enumerating a whole list of users and then trying to use one of those users to access a sensitive resource, right, such as an S3, or try to log into the AWS console or an Azure console using that user credential, right? So we have over 60 of these kinds of indicators. We're adding more every with every release, right? And what we were able to do is we have our behavior detection algorithms, which are looking at time windows of activity, and they're looking for patterns which could, increase the confidence of this IOA, right? And say, hey, we see that somebody first tried to disable bucket policies, right, and then turn off maybe versioning, and then try to list the objects within certain buckets, right, especially those which are on a different VPC or something else, right? So those kinds of patterns we're able to put together in real time and give you what's called a confidence score that's dynamic, right? And you can go remediate, you can go see if that's really an insider trying to achieve a real business purpose, or is that a malicious activity, right? That's the indicator of attack, and these are all based on control plane activity. This is not something that's on the runtime or you need a sensor to do this. The next one I'll talk about is our identity analyzer, right? Identities in the cloud mean something really unique and complex, right? Because services have identities, apps have identities, not just users and groups of users, right? And the way access and data is controlled is through these identities, right? It's easy for these permissions to proliferate, the privilege boundaries to be lax or to escalate very quickly with very little effort on the part of either developers or malicious users, right? So what we do is we are able to show you what risk any user poses at any given point in time, right? So in an example that I have on the screen here, there is a user who has not rotated their password, right, and somehow seems to have privileged access or even admin access on certain resources, right? So at this point, this person, somebody needs to investigate whether they recognize this user, what's happening with this user at this point, probably go and enforce password rotation and MFA on this user as well, and prevent this from becoming an exploit. Right. So that's what Identity Analyzer does. Again, I won't go into a lot of detail beyond this, but just to say that we look at both AWS and Azure, and providing this kind of information in a single pane of glass is really valuable because if you were to try and do this yourself, you would have to go through multiple places, even within a single cloud service provider, right? And you would lose out on the correlation as well. So I'm going to wrap with talking about what cloud security means for Crowdstrike again. What is it that we bring to the table? Right, like I said, as a company, we are adversary focused. We're bringing that same DNA and the mantra to cloud security, right? We believe in this unified platform, unified API. We have like this one single view, right? We're seeing that translate into whether it's visibility or detections, and whether it's on the control plane or in the runtime, it all comes together. It's all correlated. You can see activities, you can see detections across your cloud and up and down the stack as well, right? We also focus on proactive threat hunting in the cloud, right? We're seeing all of these misconfigurations sprawl, right, among our customer base. What we're doing is we're constantly looking for indicators that these misconfigurations are being exploited, or in the hybrid cloud world, whether they are adversaries sitting on your desktop or your laptop or private cloud that are then trying to extend themselves into the cloud, right? And that is we're seeing that as a very common threat vector, and that's something that we're proactively hunting and eliminating it for our customers, right? I talked about behavioral anomalies. I think we're continuing to move forward and investing in detecting more such behavioral anomalies, especially around the cloud, right? We're learning a lot from protecting our own cloud. As you may imagine, we as a security provider are subject to a lot of these attacks from malicious users. And so we have a whole bunch of policies and processes that we're continuously honing, and we're using that learning and essentially bringing that into the product so everybody can benefit from that, right? And finally, we have a fully integrated with its Cspm, cloud, containers, Kubernetes, security as one platform, and also delivered through the cloud, and one agent for the runtime, and one API for integration. Okay. So the one takeaway for this group from this presentation is that, yeah, we are committed to stopping breaches in the cloud at Crowdstrike. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I'm going to look at Q&A.
Absolutely. Yeah, great presentation. We do have some questions for you. Yeah. While we do those questions, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Crowdstrike solution? So if there's any questions there that kind of catch your eye, feel free to jump in. First question I was just going to ask you is, what criteria would you use when looking at a cloud security posture solution is the question they're asking.
That's a great question. Right. Traditionally, cloud security posture was treated as a compliance product, right? Saying, okay, you're moving to the cloud. Are you doing the same sets of things like, backing up data and not exposing your, IP addresses to the public internet, so on and so forth, right? But in the past 18 months or so, cloud security posture has moved to mean more than just compliance, right? It is about how are you as a customer defending yourself against any malicious behavior? How are you continuously managing the dynamic nature of the cloud, right? Say if new assets come up, how are you going to get visibility into that? How do you enforce policies? How do you maintain a baseline, so to speak, for these rapidly changing environments, right? And finally, how do you take advantage of all the cloud native benefits, right? All the PaaS services that are being released by the cloud service providers, which actually help you develop and get time to market faster. So CSPM, the definition itself is expanding. So I would look for those four criteria that I just talked about.
Okay, great advice. Let's see, another question here, also about cloud security policy management. How can a CSPM solution simplify how I deal with identity-based threats?
It's a great question. I mean, cloud identities and entitlements are an emerging area, right? There are we see increasingly that being part of cloud security posture, because it's not just the resources or the assets, but it's about what permissions are enabled on those assets and who's using them at any given point in time. So if a CSPM solution starts looking at identity, the benefit is really about unification, right? It's about saying, hey, Joe is using, he has admin permissions on these S3 buckets, which means we can go delete them. We can additionally create new objects in them, right? We can manipulate data within that. Now, is that a desirable thing? Can we put some boundaries around it? Should we give him admin access to only the S3s in a certain VPC versus others? Can we ensure that these policies are managed as groups rather than provide, access to individuals, such as Joe, right? So a posture management tool will help you find these kinds of gaps or these kinds of issues, and then, reinforce or tweak the policies around identity.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And another question they're asking here, how do you see these cloud policy management solutions working with cloud workload protection solutions in the future?
That's another great question, right? To truly protect workloads, right? And we can always debate on what the definition of what workload is, but I see it as runtimes, whether it's a VM, whether it's a container, whether it's serverless, right? Things that are a runtime. I think it's a combination of both control plane, the data plane, as well as a runtime that will truly give you end-to-end protection, right? So we do see that cloud workload protection being one of the types of protection that we provide. But if you're looking at the broader definition of posture management, it would include the CWP as well. And that's where we're seeing, just the industry trending towards. That's where we see customers expecting one platform saying, yeah, do it all, breadth and depth.
Okay. Very cool. And so we got a lot of great feedback here on your presentation, just how fascinating it was. And if folks want to get started with Crowdstrike and maybe they haven't, worked with Crowdstrike before, what do you recommend?
So if they haven't, there are a few ways in which we can get started. There is a free trial option, right? So if you go to the Crowdstrike website and, you can just start a free trial, you actually get the whole product to try on. There's documentation, there are a ton of videos as well that will help you onboard your accounts and actually give it a spin, right? The assessments just start. You can You can actually see the misconfigurations or behavioral detections, within minutes.
Very cool. Sounds like a great opportunity for a lot of folks to try this out. Somaya, really great presentation. Again, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you for having me. I hope this was useful, and look forward to talking to some of you again.
Excellent. For more information on CrowdStrike, check out the Handouts tab. There is a link right there that will take you to the maturation of cloud-native security, some additional resources on cloud security policy management on the CrowdStrike Resource Center. And of course, we appreciate your response to the poll as well. We'll leave that up. And during that, I will announce our next prize winner. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to Roger Dupree from Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Robert Dupree from Pennsylvania. And now I'm excited to bring in our next presenter on the Megacast today. Welcome, Jeremy Snyder, Senior Director for Corporate Development at Rapid7. Jeremy, thanks for being on the event today.
Really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to getting to the questions from the audience.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, take it away. Tell us about Rapid7.
Yeah, I'm really happy to do that. I mean, Rapid7 is a cybersecurity company that I think a lot of people will know for our long history with a variety of technologies, but primarily a lot of people will know us for vulnerability management, SIM and detection and response capabilities. And then I think Metasploit is also one of the brands that is really well known around the world. And I'm sure lots of the people in the audience today will have used Metasploit to do pen testing of their own environments or provide pen testing as a service. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about the evolution of cloud security over the last couple of years. And I've got a lot that I want to get through in the next 20 minutes before really, looking forward to getting to the questions from the audience. So I do apologize that I'm going to be going a little bit quick through the presentation today. I hope everybody will be able to keep up. And if not, the recording and the slides should be available, right? So, a little bit about myself. Why am I here talking to you today? So yes, I do work in corporate development, but I previously worked as the Senior Director for Security Engineering. And over the last 5-6 years, I've been working with customers around the world to keep them secure in their cloud journey. And those customers really break down into two categories. One category is the cloud native companies that have no legacy, no history, nothing to migrate. They're really born in the cloud companies. And the other is those enterprises that have been making large-scale strategic bets on shifting a lot of their focus to the cloud as they go. And that's really let me gather kind of a unique perspective of those two constituent bases and the challenges that each of them faces. And I've gathered a couple of things over that time period that I think are really interesting to think about if you're in the process of making your own transition or your own journey now, and especially kind of with a view towards how the landscape, the threat landscape around cloud security has changed over the last few years. So let's start by thinking about, kind of how we used to do security. For a lot of people, security for a long time has meant a big focus on the network, and if we're honest, really a focus on the firewall and on keeping bad actors out of our network. Once you're behind that firewall, once you're inside our perimeter, most organizations don't have a whole lot of controls around, let's say, network segmentation or zero trust internal architectures. And, we kind of think from a process perspective that the way we keep secure in that environment is by limiting the number of people that can interact with that environment, right? So we have a very tightly controlled change process, and we've got a limited number of people that are actually available to make changes. And if we think about that from kind of a logical architecture perspective, you can see it's really about keeping the threats out of the environment. But then comes change. And then for anybody who's been in IT for a while, I've been doing this for about 25 years, we all know that IT changes pretty fast. And I would argue that, in fact, the rate of change has accelerated dramatically over the past, let's say, 5-6 years. And then, of course, really dramatically over the past 20 months under the effects of COVID. With that change, we think about kind of two security vectors. One is the change that we understand. So as an example of that, we understand the shift from everybody primarily working on desktops to everybody primarily working on laptops. You know, and that's something that I'm sure a lot of us would have experienced in kind of the late 90s and early 2000s. We think of that about as managed security risk. Why? Because we understood what it meant for our users to transition to working on laptops. We knew what kind of endpoint security solutions we needed to provide. We knew what kind of group policy objects we needed to implement from an Active Directory and user management perspective. But what's happened over the last time frame is really this transition to the cloud has dramatically shifted the way that we do IT writ large. We have developers with direct access to cloud environments. We know that with the acceleration of cloud adoption, we're also seeing an acceleration of data breaches based on cloud environments. We've got some research around that should be available either as a resource to download here in the Megacast, or if not, definitely on the Rapid7 website. I can recommend to the audience the 2020 Cloud Misconfiguration Report. I think it actually dovetails nicely with the previous conversation around cloud security posture management and policy management. So for anybody who's interested in kind of diving deeper onto that topic, I would definitely invite you to check that out. But with that shift to the cloud, this brings all these new changes, and we think of that as kind of the unmanaged security risk. So these are the things that we know are happening within our organization, but we don't necessarily have mitigating controls in place. We don't know how we're going to handle those changes to our environment and what kind of security measures we're going to put in place to accommodate for that. And that's really, you know, the core challenge that most information security teams have when they shift to the cloud. So why do we shift to the cloud aside from kind of we have to because of COVID? You know, there's really two key advantages that I've observed in my own, both in my own adoption when I shifted from being a practitioner to being somebody working for one of the cloud vendors, talking to CIOs around the world, and in particular in Southeast Asia where I was living and working at the time. Agility is the #1 key that we always hear from people. And there's kind of two flavors of that. One is just kind of the nimble pace, right? So it's the ability to go from a 4-week ticket-driven provisioning experience where I say, hey, I need a server to run a particular workload, and 4 weeks later I get an email that says, here are your credentials and here's the IP address, go install it, to this kind of 4-minute stand-up where I get access to AWS or Microsoft Azure, I click in a console, I go through a wizard process, and boom, I have a virtual machine in 4 minutes. That's the speed of deployment aspect. But I think even more powerful than that is the agility, which is the ability to change from one day to the next, or the flexibility, you might think about it. And why I think that's so important is that, you know, we can look at our current context, where we are from February of 2020 to where we are in August of 2021. We've seen dramatic shifts in the way business gets done. And that's everything from the from the nature of the transaction, whether it is a cashed versus credit card, in-person versus online. We've seen such a dramatic shift. And what we know is that ultimately what underpins all of these transactions is the data and the infrastructure that makes it possible. Everything from credit card processing systems to user databases to, you know, storage assets, what have you, that makes all of that work. And business logic, of course, at the core of it. And with that shift, we know that the data you process and the way you process it may be different tomorrow from what it is today. And that can go in many different directions. Of course, a lot of people think that their needs just grow over time, but sometimes the needs are fundamentally different. Sometimes we go from needing a relational database to needing a graph database, or we go from needing a single virtual machine to needing a Kubernetes cluster because our application architecture has fundamentally changed. And that is something that cloud is uniquely positioned to help businesses with. If you don't like, or your needs have changed from the infrastructure that you have today, you shut it down, you deprovision, you walk away from it. No harm, no foul, no additional cost incurred. That's really the agility or the flexibility that you get from the agile nature of cloud. And I think that is the unappreciated reason why cloud adoption is so high. And it's not just only COVID has been an accelerant, but the agility is really the key. So there's a couple stats on the screen. I'm not going to go through all of them, but suffice it to say, cloud is growing like crazy. It was already growing really, really fast on its own, already at a very large size. And then, since Q2 of 2020, the growth rate has been dramatically higher, as I'm sure everybody knows. But what does that mean for information security teams? I think one of the core fundamentals that InfoSec teams need to understand is the concept of the shared responsibility model. And we're going to talk about kind of where the lines are and how this has evolved over time. The number one thought that I will leave here, and feel free to read the stats on the screen, I'm not going to go through them, but the number one thing you need to understand is that your provider is responsible for the security of the platform that they're providing you, and you are responsible for your own security in the platform. And I found a really nice graphic from, kudos to the folks over at Synopsys who put this together. I just think this is kind of the best visual representation that I found. If you think about kind of a full stack architecture, everything from the physical layer up through the data layer, application layer, et cetera, you'll notice that everything in blue is what the provider is responsible for. Everything in green is what you as the customer are responsible for. Certainly infrastructure as a service is where you have the most responsibility. But you'll notice that in all of these different flavors of cloud services, whether it is IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, you, the customer, are always responsible for your own data and for the people accessing that data. So you're always responsible for identity, access management, rights, permissions, everything that goes along with it, and then the data that you have inside of it. So I want the whole audience, if you take away nothing else from my presentation today, please remember, where your responsibility is in the shared responsibility model. Now, how else is cloud security different? We talked about that perimeter-oriented approach that a lot of businesses have in traditional architectures. And that's great and all, but again, the focus was really on firewall, keeping people out of the network. Well, what happens when every kind of component within your environment is virtualized? You've got, virtual storage, virtual machines. Database is no longer something built on an operating system. It is a service that you consume from the cloud provider and so on. And when I do this conversation in person, I like to do an audience show of hands here. I'll kind of pause for a second for everybody to really come to their own conclusions as to the question on the slide. How many security and compliance considerations are in this architecture diagram? By the way, this is a reference architecture from AWS of a multi-tier WordPress site. So very standard, straightforward architecture. All right, everybody got your answer in mind? Hopefully you went for C21+, and I just started by listing some of them. When I originally did this, I came up with something north of 30 controls even. And you'll see that at every layer of the architecture, whether that is infrastructure, database storage, et cetera, there are multiple security controls. And because the infrastructure is virtualized, these are all configuration choices done in your virtualized environment. And that's why something like cloud security posture management has historically been so important. So let's talk about where customers have gotten things wrong in the past and what the historical, core problem of cloud security posture management has been. We're going to look at a case study of a breach from 2017. This is from Booz Allen Hamilton. I apologize to any BAH people who might happen to be in the audience today. This is years ago. Hopefully, don't hold against us that we're calling this out as an example. The breach itself was an open S3 bucket. S3 is the storage service of AWS, which happens to be the leader in the cloud space. I'm sure many of the audience are familiar with it. S3 is kind of a virtual disk drive in the cloud. You can just toss documents into it. Well, there were a number of mistakes in the configuration. One was, of course, leaving it open to the world. Beyond that, there are also some security best practices and principles violated here, mixing workloads, storing data from multiple customers together, storing credentials together with data. I mean, that's just a huge no-no, right? We all know that we store credentials and secrets in very different locations from applications and workloads, right? And so, a number of problems here. But when we look at this from the architecture perspective, where did this breach happen? you'll see that the breach bypassed all of the network perimeter controls, really went straight to an individual storage asset, and then from that storage location, the bad actor had the ability to extract credentials, keys, et cetera, and gain access to servers and workloads. So it's really kind of flipping the network perimeter paradigm on its head, going straight to storage. And you kind of ask yourself, well, what use is perimeter security if you're going to have things that live kind of outside that perimeter that don't even fall behind a perimeter level control that I might be putting in place? So what I like to say to people is like, look, historically, these cloud data breaches have not been attacks. They've not been hacks. They've really been the result of customer error and misconfiguration, and that's something that's really important to keep in mind. The way I like to think of that is you kind of divide your operating environment on two axes. First is kind of the stack axis, where you've got really the infrastructure layer and then the OS layer above. And second is kind of your time axis, where you've got, you know, basically production and pre-production, and everything falls into one of those four quadrants. And if you look at it, the target environment for the first wave of cloud data breaches that have happened, you know, from, let's say, 2015 through 2019, 2020, has really been focused on infrastructure layer controls in production environments. But that is not necessarily where things are headed. For those that are curious, I'll leave this here for a second. Feel free to grab a quick screenshot or again, get the slides afterwards. These are the #1 services that have been breached over time, and the #1 services or configurations that have had issues that have led to cloud data breaches. All right, so let's talk about how the landscape has shifted. I think the #1 thing for the shifting of the landscape is we're seeing now multi-vector attacks that leverage lots of different components of a cloud architecture. One of the best case studies here is Capital One from about, I think, 16, 18 months ago. Massive data breach, 106 million records total, again, multi-vector. Let's walk through how this played out. So the first thing that happened was we had an application layer vulnerability that led to operating system access, right? That operating system was now accessed with shell access by a bad actor. Using the shell access, the actor was able to enumerate the permissions associated with the instance. And I know one of the questions that came out of the last session was, where does identity security fall in importance in the cloud picture? And I would tell you, this is one of the most crucial components. The way that secrets management happens on abstracted infrastructure as a service cloud offerings is that any number of infrastructure components can have an identity associated with it. And the way this works is that it really replaces things like service accounts that we had in the old school. We no longer have to store passwords inside an operating system. We kind of associate an identity, and by virtue of that identity, the secrets and the access credentials to that piece of infrastructure. And then what that leads to is the ability to then break out of that operating system to other core infrastructure components. One thing we notice from more sophisticated cloud customers is that they don't store application data on the instance. The instance may be ephemeral. It's just running the workload. Where they store the data is either in long-term storage like S3 buckets or in database services like Amazon RDS, Relational Database Service, or DynamoDB, or any number of other database as a service offerings. And so once that identity was leveraged and the lateral movement was enabled to go to a storage asset, that's when the data exfiltration happened. So we can kind of look at that. You see this one actually did come in through the perimeter, accessed a publicly available application, which was what the configuration said it should be able to do, leverage that application vulnerability to the operating system identity, instance identity, not operating system identity, but piece of infrastructure identity out to the S3 bucket to get data out of the environment. So the second wave of cloud security, and really where we've evolved to, is that we're now facing a set of multi-vector attacks that leverage all these different pieces of the infrastructure stack. And so when we go back to that kind of four-sector diagram that we think about, we realize that, you know, where cloud security is today, it is really all four of these quadrants. And what we should think about is, do we have mitigating controls And do we have oversight onto all 4 of these vectors or all 4 of these quadrants? And so what I would encourage anybody to do is to expand your thinking, break out of the mindset that says, CSPM on its own is enough. Definitely container security, workload protection, all of that is important, but really try to think through your overall process and kind of your big picture of how your organization is operating. And then, kind of just last thing for those that are interested, please do feel free to check out Rapid7 in this area. We have an offering called Inside CloudSec that bundles together the expertise around cloud security, posture management, Kubernetes, and container runtime, as well as layering in vulnerability management, identity and access management, and application security on top of that. With that, I will say thank you. I think we're, maybe 1 minute under time, and I'd love to turn that time over to the audience for Q&A.
Absolutely. Yeah, great presentation. Really cool stuff. Thank you, Jeremy. We do have some questions for you from the audience. And while we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about Rapid7? And we appreciate your feedback. So let's see, a lot of great questions coming in for you, Jeremy, about Rapid7. One question here, they're asking, does Rapid7 do anything around detecting misconfigurations that could lead to potential security or data breaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a core component of the cloud security posture management piece of the Inside CloudSec solution. So yeah, absolutely. So it supports, I want to say somewhere around a couple hundred cloud infrastructure components with configuration checks around that, kind of 500-ish controls spread across a number of compliance standards. Not that the question specifically asked that, but yeah, absolutely. There's a very rich library of configuration checks around the cloud environments.
Excellent. And I guess this is kind of a related question. They say, does Rapid7 provide audit-level configuration recommendations for cloud configuration settings?
So yes, with a qualification, and the qualification there is that auditors can be funny people in how they like to interpret controls. So what we've done with our solution is we've taken kind of 12 of the most common audit standards, and we do have actually an auditor on staff who takes those and breaks those standards down into controls, provides all of the mapping, and then provides our interpretation of the controls. So really the caveat is, your mileage may vary if you get a particular, let's say a particular auditor who has an opinionated view on things. But yeah, absolutely. We've taken, like I said, those 12 standards, broken them down and provided guidance around the prescribed controls to the extent that we can. And, again, with our view and opinion on it.
Excellent. Nice. Another question here, they're asking, do you have any customer, use cases, case studies on how this has helped other companies?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a number that you can find on the Rapid7 website. And certainly I'd say some of the ones that would be really valuable kind of depends, again, which side you're coming from. If you're coming from the migration side, I would really point you at the Discovery Channel. There's a great case study on how we've been working with Discovery Channel for a number of years. Massive migration of literally, hundreds of terabytes of historical content to a, over-the-top streaming solution with Discovery Plus that I'm sure many people will be aware of. And on the other side, I'd say, probably look at some of our customers like, Twilio and Spotify for what those who are more cloud native have done, and they should find some case studies around those companies as well.
Nice, very nice. Always great to hear how you guys have helped other companies. Next question, are there any other high-level trends in security operations that you see driving a shift away from traditional network security approaches?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the overall kind of view that things are really transitioning to software-defined means that every layer, not only network, becomes more and more important to look at, especially because there are any number of components that are not necessarily going through those network security checks and controls that we might have put in place in the past. But the other big kind of trends that I would see is really trying to look at more secure build by design. And we're seeing a lot more interest from customers who are saying, look, what I want to move towards automation in general because we know it's less prone to human error, and that's a good thing, right? But we also know that because everything is software defined now, we can pass configurations through a checker pre-flight, or we can pass things like identity and access management through a simulated control, so we know, whether Jeremy has too many permissions and so on. And that kind of, trend of really like pre-checking things before it goes into the world, and we have to look at, network detection and response, et cetera. That's one of the other big trends. And where we're seeing the most success is for customers who really try to, frankly, tear down the wall between security and development. And they try to really provide a continuous feedback loop to the developers who are building environments, and do it in a less confrontational way than maybe, let's say, us security people have a reputation for doing in the past. But let's do it with an air of kind of, informing people on what good looks like for us and why it's important that we work together and collaborate on that. And I'd say, because things are so inspectable now that everything is software defined, we're seeing a lot of success for companies, with more collaboration between those groups and really bringing security into the equation earlier in the build process.
Okay, excellent advice. I like this question here. They're asking, do you have any tips for cloud security best practices?
Yeah, I mean, look, number one thing is establish visibility as the first step in whatever you're doing relative to cloud security. Whether you're focused on, workload, application, data layer, infrastructure layer, SaaS layer, whatever it is, if you don't know that it's there and you don't have visibility onto it, you absolutely cannot know whether it's secure or not. So when we talk to customers, that is the first question that we always ask is, do you know what you have out there? There's any number of solutions that can help you there. There are things like external attack surface management that can help you discover things from an outside-in view. And then, of course, there's things like Cspm that can work, across multiple cloud vendors, across multiple cloud accounts, and just give you that centralized view. Once you have that visibility, almost anybody out there, or there's any number of open source solutions that you can use, will start with kind of a baseline assessment. I like to tell people that, my opinion, right, and obviously your mileage may vary, the CIS benchmarks are really where I like to tell customers to start. They're kind of a least common denominator for best practices around cloud security. It's not overwhelming. I think a lot of people get really hung up on, oh crap, I have to go do, NIST 800.53, and I've got 500 controls that I need to go, check the box on in cloud security. And that's like super overwhelming to start your cloud security journey. So I like to tell people, get visibility, start with something that's like basics and common sense, like the CIS benchmark. That would be really my recommendation for where to start.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in our live Q&A, but, really great presentation. We got a lot of good electronic questions there still for you in the queue, Jeremy, if you don't mind responding to some of those.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And thanks to Rapid7 for being on the event today and supporting our Cloud Security Megacast. Make sure that you check out the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find a resource on Insight Cloud Sec from Rapid7. So make sure that you check that one out before the event ends. All right. I'll leave up the poll question for everyone to respond to while I announce our next prize winners. We have another Amazon $500 gift card. This one going to Jacob Kaplis from Illinois. And our next Mavic Air 2 drone, this one's going to Matthew Kuzer from Georgia. Congratulations to all the prize winners. And with that, I'm excited now to bring in someone I've known for quite a while, now at Red Hat, Mr. Stu Miniman, Director of Market Insights for Hybrid Platforms. Stu, take it away.
David, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here on a Megacast. I've definitely watched many of them in the past, and we've got a quick presentation here, got some Q&As at the end, and we're going to be digging in what we call hybrid cloud security. So just real quick background on me. So I've been with Red Hat. I joined last year. And before that, for a decade, I was a technology analyst and a host of a video program called theCUBE. So in my old job, I interviewed thousands of people, thought leaders and practitioners in the space. My background is heavily in networking, virtualization, and cloud. In my current day job, I spend a lot of time working with customers and partners. So obviously my background in networking, virtualization, and cloud had a lot of intersection with security. So I have a lot on kind of the trends and what we're hearing from our thousands of customers that are using it. So that will color and influence what I'm going to go through today. So let's get right into it. Real quick on the agenda, the security of imperative for 2021, really what has changed? What are some of the hot topics? What are we hearing from those, key constituencies? I talked about our customers, the security trends overall, what's bubbling up, what is moving forward. And then of course, so I work for Red Hat. We'll talk about, why security is so important and imbued in everything that we do at the company. So first, let's talk 2021. So what really has happened in the last year or so? So of course, during the pandemic, really put a huge spotlight on security. As this cartoon shows, we're really talking about the prioritization of security increasing a lot in the last year or so. So security was already a top item. In many ways, I said it went from priority 1 to like priority 0. It's something we need to think about all the time. And what I liked about this illustration, it is something that is a board level conversation. So what does the board care about? They care about not being the next headline of someone that has been breached and broken the trust that they had with their customers or are under some kind of attack. But it isn't just the senior levels that are plugged into security. As a friend of mine, Mark Nunenkopf, would talk at conferences, he said security is everyone's responsibility. To actually get us all chanting. So say it along with me, security is everyone's responsibility. So I think we've all heard this. Corporate IT pushes down, gives you lots of alerts and warnings. Heck, even in your personal life, I know in my family text chain, it's always, hey, the latest version of iOS is out. This has a clear security issue, or hey, be on the lookout for something in email, either at work or at home, that might look like it's something cool or interesting, but actually is some kind of phishing attack, and you don't want to click at that. So unfortunately, that fear of security breaches is something that is permeated everywhere today, and something that is top of mind, so that everyone is thinking about security. When we talk about security, it's not just that there are lots of security products and everyone is spending lots of money on security. We really need to think of security more as a practice. So as I mentioned here, security is both technology and the people, the culture and the process, and you need to have all of those pieces together. So from a technology standpoint, there are so many different areas that security plays into, because security, as we said, it's not only everyone's responsibility, but it's everything up and down the stack, from the hardware vendors all the way up through the application standpoint and everywhere in between. We need to make sure that security is the new fabric of our lives. And from a culture and process standpoint, it's no longer just a silo of a security team, but if you heard the term DevSecOps, security is really getting woven in. This doesn't mean that everyone becomes a security expert, but everyone needs to be aware and communicating with security as an upfront discussion, not a bolt-on after the fact. Because if you think about security after the fact, the bad agents may have gotten in there before you have a chance to update things. So think of security holistically. It's, as I said, not eliminating roles or making everybody a security pro, but more about communication, collaboration, and how we can do things. So with that thread that we just talked about, how do we make sure that security is continuous and holistic? So if we look at this loop that we have here on the screen, we talk about when we think about our code, when we think about our applications, there's this ongoing life cycle from when we design things to when we build things out to make updates. Governance, compliance are very important in many different categories in the industry. Red Hat, we're with companies from every industry, but some of the ones that have a lot of governance and compliance, of course, government agencies, healthcare, financial services, all have specific needs and requirements that are put in front of them. So security, you have the certain things that you have to do, the certain things that you should do, and it can be a little bit overwhelming for most people, and that's why security really needs to be something that you think about holistically and across everyone in the company. When it comes to the space that I live in, the cloud computing space, we've talked a lot about containers and Kubernetes, and there's actually an opportunity for us to rethink how we work with security. So containerization changes the way we build our applications, and in some ways it does change the threats that we can have in a containerized environment, but it also gives us that opportunity to rethink. So when people looked at cloud computing, if you scroll back the time about 5 years ago, the number one reason why people were not adopting cloud computing faster was they were concerned about security. If you look today and say, why are people adopting cloud? It's the opportunity to rethink how we do security. So it was great. It's funny, David and I would talk early in our careers. Security was, hey, if I can put it in a cabinet and lock the door, things were kind of secure. Well, today, you can't just isolate things. Sure, there's certain things that you can, disconnect from the internet or not have it connected, but for the most part, everything is connected. You no longer think about just the outside perimeter, but there's the expectation that people will find a way into, through the moat or the firewall to be able to get there. So how do we make sure we can protect things all the way through? So that feedback loop is so important. We talked about in this slide, the DevSecOps, the development group and the operations group need to be collaborating, communicating, and giving themselves feedback, as well as trusting each other and making sure that they pull the right people in and have the right updates that are going on. It's interesting. One of the things we talk about in the cloud era is in the data center, it was always tough to when do I get the next version of an update, and how far behind am I? And that is one of the opportunities when we go to cloud is we should be able to have rolling updates happen more frequently. We should be able to push code more often. And as anybody in the security space will tell you, one of the things you need to do faster is when you've got patches, when you've got security holes, you need to be able to close those. So moving to later, newer versions of code faster is super important, and therefore that faster speed of doing things is going to help you overall with security, not break you from a security standpoint, done properly, of course. So along those lines, it's interesting in the IT space, automation has been something we've been talking about for decades, and you might look at it and say, why are we talking about automation if we're talking about security? Well, as a friend of actually David and mine's, Justin Warren, actually gives out stickers. He said, humans have been ruining everything since forever. And sometimes it's maliciously, and sometimes it's just, oops, I made a mistake. So the last thing you want is somebody made a mistake and I left some setting open and people could get in, or I've given somebody too much privilege into what they're doing, and therefore they have access to things, or they may let somebody else get access to information when they couldn't. So when they shouldn't be able to have that. So why is automation important? Number one is we can reduce how many errors there are, because we know humans are prone to error. Of course, computers can really muck things up for us if we're not careful about it. But there's the principle of least privilege, which means what we want to make sure is that humans can just focus on the things that they need to do, and certain other things can be done by policy and happen automatically. So that's where we need to think about automation more, and it can really help our overall threat, reduce the threats that we have there. The other piece along that line is, for most companies, we've really gone beyond what humans can do from a scale standpoint. So if you just think about how many changes are happening, we need to get to a certain scale of operations. And this is where automation isn't just a nice to have, it is really a requirement these days that automation is a key piece in there. And we talked about the people and process and culture piece. What hopefully we've been getting through in the last few years is to no longer fear the machine. Automation is our friend. It is really people and machines working together that will do things better. There's an interesting book out there called Racing with the Machine by a couple of MIT professors. They talk about things like the second machine age. If you don't embrace it, you will be overcome by the challenges. And people plus machines will always do better than machines alone or people alone themselves. Along that lines, one of the buzzwords you might hear out there, if you're not too familiar with, this idea of GitOps. So if you're a developer, if you have a team of developers, you're probably quite familiar with Git, one of the most important things in the software world in the last decade or so. So GitOps is a way to have Git be the center of where your code is managed. So from an automation standpoint, the way we host our code, the way we implement our code is all done through Git. So it's a Git-based operations process. And therefore, we talked about automation is going to remove there being mistakes. So if you say, oh wait, is this supposed to go in production? Which version of code am I on? If I put it all in Git, it is going to make sure that only the proper code can be deployed. We check in code, we check out code. It will actually validate configurations along the way to be able to make sure that everything happens along with what we define. It is relatively early in the adoption of GitOps, but something that we've had many customers that are very interested in this. And again, it's along that automation spectrum that we were discussing in the previous slide. One last trend, so I work for Red Hat, so you'd expect me to talk about open source, but you also heard me talk about that there was the hesitancy to adopt cloud a few years back because of security. Well, it's been interesting to see really the open source permeate through lots of different environments. So this year's State of Enterprise Open Source showed some of the top areas where open source is being used. So it's not just that Linux is everywhere, but if you see here, networking, database, and security are all over 50% of the enterprises polled in this. And if you get the slides, the links on the bottom to the full report are in there. So, and not only are 52% of people using security, but over 87% said that open source security was more secure or as secure as proprietary software. We've even seen many of the more successful new startups in the security space are open source to begin with. So we know that open source not only enables a community, but really helps to drive that speed of change and collaboration that we talked about, which is really inherent to making things more secure. Okay, so I've blasted through a whole lot of trends and what's happening in the space and security. I've only really scratched the surface as to what's going on, but I do need to just share as to how Red Hat really we fit into this environment. So this is what we call the Red Hat Open Hybrid Cloud. It's the strategy we've been driving at for more than a decade now. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see Red Hat Enterprise Linux. That's where we have decades of experience taking Linux and making it supportable for the enterprise. So if you think about reliability, security, and scale, that is our legacy, and that's why we've got tens of thousands of customers using our Linux. OpenShift is the solution that I'm part of in the cloud organization at Red Hat, and we've been working on Kubernetes since before it was generally available. Google pulled us in the early days, and just as we did for Linux many years ago, what we've done for Kubernetes in the container space is make that, as I said, reliable, secure, and really the scale that you want in a cloud native environment for there. It has a great expanse of applications that can be built and run in a containerized environment. And what's the connection from a security standpoint? Well, it's really that consistency of security. So what do we do with our container offering? It is really about giving you a consistent tool chain tool chain that you can build and you can have in any of these environments. So it's in your data center, running on a virtualization farm, running on bare metal, running in one or more of the many public clouds out there, or even going to an edge environment. OpenShift and Red Hat Enterprise Linux can live in all of those environments, and you can have a consistency of security across those environments. So I'm sure with your security hat, you can think about this and say, oh my gosh, I had to think about the security on this server, the security in this environment, the security in this cloud, and I have to learn all of those different pieces. Well, look, Kubernetes is not a silver bullet, but having that consistency of the environment built with Linux and OpenShift will give you that consistency that we really can lower the learning curve that you have to go across all of those environments. Just to dig in a little bit deeper, if you talk about OpenShift, there's many pieces, and OpenShift is built all off of open source projects and technologies. So it is not just a piece of security, but there's lots of projects and lots of pieces really do security by default, so that what we've found many times even is if there was a vulnerability found in Kubernetes, Red Hat customers often are not exposed to it, either from what we do with our Linux, how we do our OpenShift, or how we do our configuration, or if there is a vulnerability that would affect what we're doing, we will actually work fast with the community, make sure everything gets upstream with open source, and we backport it to a number of revisions so that you don't necessarily have to go to the newest version of Kubernetes to be able to get that fix. So the control, protect, and detect and respond, a lot of what we do across OpenShift. And earlier this year, we also made an acquisition of a company called StackRox, which helped add above the base infrastructure layer. It is Kubernetes cloud native security built on top of it. So even more to build into making sure we have a secure supply chain, work at many of the compliance assessments, as well as understand some of the application pieces. So continuing to go up the stack to build out more support into the cloud native environment. I mentioned that this is a lot of open source in our environment. Sorry again. One of the ones I mentioned was GitOps. So we do have GitOps actually included in OpenShift. Here are some of the CI/CD pieces that just come with OpenShift. So OpenShift Build, OpenShift Pipelines, which is based on Tekton, and OpenShift GitOps, which is based off of Argo CD, are all generally available. And in OpenShift, OpenShift GitOps is actually the first generally available solution built into a product when the project went generally available earlier this year. But we have a lot of pieces built into our offering, but being open source and very open in how we build things, we also have a lot of ecosystem integration. So you'll see on the bottom of the slide, there's other pieces. If you have a different pipeline that you would like to use, there's lots of ways that you can do many of the developer tools and the integrations. So there's many ways that you can either use what comes with OpenShift or swap out something else. And when it comes to security, we have a very broad partner ecosystem. We make sure to enable those. Many of the open source companies I mentioned, like Sneak is one, Sysdig, Aqua, many companies across many segments of the security ecosystem. We know that Red Hat alone will not get you all of the security you need, so we make sure that we have the foundations and the pieces, and we'll be open and have APIs and have operators to make it easy to install and maintain these environments. And we go from there. So a lot to cover, of course, in a segment like this. But if you want to learn more about security, the top link here, the red.ht/security info, has a great white paper on some more on this topic, Hybrid Cloud Security 101. And if you or your team are ready to want to try out these products, there's the Try website up on the cloud.redhat.com, where you can actually get your hands-on, no cost to start out, and get your hands-on the software, even get a managed solution in there, if you want to start building on top of it without having to think as much about the application. So I'm going to take a deep breath, David. I'm probably covered a broad thing here, so would be open to what questions we have in the time remaining.
Absolutely, yeah. Excellent presentation, Stu, as always. We do have some questions for you from the audience, and the first one I see here that came in, I mean, obviously you know the state of the industry better than anyone out there. They're wanting to know, what security threats do you feel are particularly front and center right now?
Yeah, that's a really important one. So I talked at the beginning of the presentation how security has become even a higher priority. Unfortunately, as everybody went home, it didn't mean that the bad actors stopped. So the one that I didn't talk about in this presentation that I'm sure everybody's been reading more about than you'd care to is ransomware. So I'll tell you, even I was going to one of my doctors in my hometown that had gotten hit by ransomware. So this is something that, whether you are a large oil and gas company through to a local solo practitioner in suburban Massachusetts, it can hit you. So ransomware is one that you really need to be aware of. It is one of those areas that really I showed our partner ecosystem slide, and that's our the data protection solutions out there. We have so many products out there that we work with. David, I'm sure you've done entire megacasts on the ransomware topic, because I know I've seen some of the stuff that you've done in your ecosystem. Everybody knows that well. So yeah, ransomware is the one that I'd say is front and center. The worry, of course, these days, it's not a question of if you'll be attacked, it's a question of, do you know you've been attacked, and how do you remediate when something happens?
Absolutely, yeah, very, very well said. Like you said, you see ransomware on the news, but some companies out there might think, well, it'll never hit us. But like you said, your doctor, I know my local fire department was infected for a week with ransomware. It was in the papers. So yeah, scary times, certainly something we all need to be aware of and have that kind of, security in place to try to prevent it, but also to recover should we need to. And then I know we're running out of time here in our live Q&A session, but one of the things you talked about, and I'm specifically interested in myself, is trying out OpenShift. Can you tell us a little bit more about the OpenShift sandbox that you've mentioned?
Yeah, so right. So the link, on my last slide there, there's a few options. So there is a developer sandbox. I believe that gives you 60 days to go play around with a fully functional environment out there. There's lots of ways to get access. There is, in addition to the developer sandbox, something we've seen, a strong growth, and generally the industry is looking at this, is managed services. So, I don't have time to go into it, but, highly differentiated in our managed services. We have, fully managed services on, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, as well as the IBM cloud. And thanks to our partnership, IBM, who of course acquired Red Hat a few years back, you can actually get a IBM managed service OpenShift instance that you can fully use it. So again, this isn't, some limited use, some limited functionality piece of code, and that's one of the challenges. OpenShift has a lot to it, so you want your people to be able to get in, figure out how to use it. And from a managed service standpoint, since our team, there's a full team of SREs that stand behind it, you don't have to worry about building the clusters. You can worry about building on top of it and understanding that interaction between the application and the infrastructure itself, and how to scale things and grow things, and where you would need to worry about from a security standpoint. You can look at the difference between, as I said, if we can manage more of the infrastructure, that shared responsibility model that you're probably familiar with from the public cloud, we go a little bit further up stack with our managed services than what you get in the public cloud, where really they just manage the, kind of the core pieces, and you're much more responsible from it, like a Kubernetes standpoint, in the worker nodes and managing and securing those environments. So yeah, definitely, glad the sandbox is a great way to get your hands on things and help to really understand the technology.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like an excellent resource for anyone out there who wants to learn more about OpenShift and how it can help to, better secure and really make companies more efficient. So, Stu, it's always great to chat with you. It's always great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
All right, I just brought up the poll question for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Red Hat solution? And we appreciate your feedback on that. That was a fun chat with Stu. Thank you to Stu, and thank you to Red Hat for joining us today. Don't forget about the Handouts tab, and it's there that you'll find a link to redhat.com. And I want to try out that Red Hat OpenShift sandbox for myself. The link was cloud.redhat.com/try. And I know Florin was asking about that in the questions pane. How can I try out OpenShift, build it in a lab? And certainly you could build it in a lab, but the OpenShift sandbox seems like a great solution. So you can just do it in the cloud. You don't have to have physical servers or virtual machines to run it. Just run it in the OpenShift sandbox. So we'll leave up the poll question here for everyone to respond to while I announce our next Amazon $500 gift card winner. This one's going out to Jason Pine from Kentucky. Congratulations, Jason Pine from Kentucky. Still 2 more gift cards and 2 more grand prizes to give out on the Megacast today, so make sure that you stay tuned for those drawings, as well as some awesome sessions coming up here from Firemon and Illumio. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. I am routing all of the electronic questions to Stu at Red Hat since we didn't have time to get to those in the live session here, and we appreciate your questions. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to our next expert presenter on today's Megacast. Welcome, Lisa Wallace, Sales Engineer at Firemon. Lisa, thanks for being on.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
Take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to talk today about securing the cloud. Just to begin, I know we've got a pretty technical audience here, but I'm not sure how many of you are really cloud savvy. So I just want to do a little bit of level set. I am not going to read this slide to you. I just wanted to set up for the differences between public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid. Public cloud allows you to deliver things through the internet. It's internet facing. People can see what you're providing, what you're serving up. A lot of times this is a software as a service type model. Private cloud is going to be, might be something a little more internal. Still maybe in your Azure, your AWS, your GCP, primary cloud provider, but it's restricted to your company. Any resources are very tightly controlled via ACLs, and it's pretty much all yours. Hybrid cloud is what we're seeing most of our clients do. This has elements of public, elements of private. You're hanging out in the Azure, AWS, GCP. Maybe you've got some Office 365 and Exchange stuff that's internal, but you've got some Azure that's serving up a public presence. We're also seeing a lot of clients cross-platform. They've got a little bit of everything. They've got the Azure, but they've also got some things in AWS. Maybe they've got some things in Google Cloud for their development teams. They're multi-tenanted. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you the ability to cover all of those. Poll question for you. Over the past 18 months, what's your company doing in the cloud? Are you accelerating? We're accelerating significantly. COVID has kicked things into high gear. We're really moving out there. We're accelerating slightly. We made a little more of a footprint there, but we're really not taking over. We're still on track for the same pace that we had before things got changed up. We're actually slowing down. We want to get a better handle on this. Or you're freezing all cloud projects. What's that look like to you? This is some information from our Future of Network Security poll that we recently did. We surveyed 500 IT security leaders across North America and EMEA to find out what they're looking at. What we got from those people, and there's a link here, you can download this full report. You can also reach out to us afterwards, and we're happy to provide that. About 44% of the respondents said we're still on target. We're shifting at the same space. 23% said we're accelerating slightly. 11% said we're accelerating significantly. Foot on the gas, we are all for it. The next two kind of surprised me. I didn't really expect to see 18% slowing down their cloud transition, and 4% were actually freezing their cloud projects. I will be really curious when we hit the poll questions at the end, how the audience compares to that. We've got to think differently. The cloud is a different animal than our on-prem stuff. New strategies, new tools, new things to work with. It used to be that attackers would find a target and start looking for vulnerabilities. Now the coin's flipped. They're looking for vulnerabilities and then going and picking their target. The cloud's really changed our landscape. The attack surface is everywhere. The attack surface is now the internet. Previously, with everything on-prem, your attack surface was what you were choosing to expose at your perimeter. Now your perimeter is everywhere. Everything can be presented publicly, and everything can be presented publicly accidentally. Misconfigurations are a much bigger deal now. You're going to get a lot of exposure where if you did a minor misconfiguration on an on-prem device, it might not be that big of a deal. A misconfiguration on a cloud device is going to be a big deal right up front. So if the attackers are going to tweak what they're doing, if they're going to change up how they do things, how they work on things, we're going to need to do the same. If you're familiar with the Cloud Security Alliance, there's a lot of great resources out there if you're not. They've got what they call their egregious 11. These are the 11 most common causes of data breach, compromises that they're seeing among their membership, breaches that they investigate. They've got things all the way from the Capital One down to very minor breaches, and this is what they said the top 11 are. Data breaches, to me, is a very broad, sweeping term, and to me it is often a result of number two, misconfiguration, whether accidental or on purpose, and inadequate change control. When we're making those changes, do we understand them? Do we fully understand the impact? And how are we allowing for the fact that we're all human and humans make mistakes? Number three is the lack of cloud security architecture and strategy. Are we just popping things out there? Does your organization have an overarching security focus for the cloud? Do you truly understand what's going on out there? Do you truly understand what controls you're putting in place? Do you understand if you expose something what your true exposure is? Are you got compensated controls for anything you do need to put out there to make sure that you're not subject to someone maybe leveraging a vulnerability or something configured not quite the way you intended? Insufficient identity credentials, access, and key management. Credential popping is still big. It's easy to do. It's low-hanging fruit. Account hijacking goes along with that. Insider threats. This really requires compensating controls, the checks and balances of your organization, because there's not a tool out there that's going to protect you wholesale from someone in your organization who may have a beef, may have a grievance, and has the access to actually do some damage to you. Insecure interfaces and APIs. This is where the attackers are going to be looking for vulnerabilities in what you've got out there that you believe is secure, but maybe there's an API with a function that doesn't work quite as intended. And then the last one's weak control plane, metastructure and applistructure failures, limited cloud usage visibility. What you have out there, if you're looking at your logs, I always tell people this, not only look at your incoming, but look at your outgoing. Look at what's leaving. Egress is equally important. You may have information leaving the building you don't even know about, even if your building is floating in the cloud. And then abuse and the various use of cloud services. That's going to be more attacker activity. This one I'm really curious about. What is your organization doing with SASE stuff? Are you looking at a Zscaler, Cato Networks, Palo Alto Prisma? What's that look like to you? We're seeing more and more of this. Have you already implemented it? You're going to do it this year. You're going to do it in the next couple years. It's further down the roadmap, or it is not on your roadmap at all at this time.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm interested to see the results on this. We'll let everyone respond
really
here.
Because sometimes we get these and it's a true mirror to what we've done in the future of cloud of network security. And sometimes the audience is really varied, and I would really love to get all those people to sit down and figure out where those different viewpoints are coming from.
And it looks like 36% haven't implemented quite yet, but on the other hand of the equation there, 26% have already implemented, and it looks like 28% or 30% are roughly kind of in the middle there. They have plans to implement in the next year or 2 years. What do you think, Lisa?
Interesting. Well, let's see how that compared to the polls that we did. Again, we sat down with 500 IC security leaders. We saw drivers behind this, replacing legacy VPN with zero trust network access. That's going to lend a lot more to the SASE type solution, your Zscalers and things like that in particular. We saw 58% of people, that was one of their drivers. 55% said reducing cost and complexity is one of their drivers. Improving the user experience. We've all got more people working at home than we ever have before. How are we going to make things better for them? And then follow along with the second point, enabling an increasingly mobile and distributed workforce. I actually heard a lot of clients, and I really wish we could make this one a poll question because I would love to hear how our audience is handling this. Talked to a lot of clients recently who are seeing more of a mobile workforce than they ever have, and it's driving some of their cloud initiatives. Because what they've decided as they've moved a lot of their workforce, into a more mobile, home-based, you can work wherever you need to, is that they're focusing a little more for their open positions on the best candidate rather than the best candidate in XYZ geographic location. So that's causing them to focus, the whole business is shifting a little bit. And then we've got about 42% of our respondents are securing access to the cloud and software as a service applications. And then 39% are reducing the number of point security solutions. And we've got a statement there on the return on investment. You can download this case study for hypercloud visibility and compliance. I believe that's also going to be available. That link will be available at the end if you don't snag it here. Then we start looking at the top cloud misconfiguration areas that we're seeing. These are all human-based. We are all humans. We hire the best possible people we can. They're doing the best job they can, but I haven't talked to a client yet that is doing too much. They've got too many people and too much money. I'm going to talk here about some specific areas that Firemon can help you out. We're going to look at your network policy. That's the #1 cloud misconfiguration area. Network security policy management is controlling access to the resources, controlling the access to the resources that you put out either on-prem, internally, or externally facing, and your cloud resources. The outcome of that misconfiguration is going to be you're going to have breaches, you're going to have attackers getting hold of your information. Equally important to me is compliance violations. If you are violating your HIPAA, your NERC-CIP if you're in utility space, if you are violating GDPR, the new CCPA stuff, PCI, you may not actually see information leaving your building, but what you're opening your company up to is compliance violations up to and including regulatory fines and penalties. So then you've got reputational impact to your business and you have financial impact to your business. So let's clean that up for you. Unplanned outages. It is equally detrimental to not serve something up as to serve something up. If you serve up a resource in such a way that it can't talk to another resource, or you serve up a resource in such a way that maybe it's vulnerable to a denial of service, maybe you've got unplanned exposures and it's allowing an attacker to just flood that pipe to the point where your clients get to something that is critical to your business. You've got an unplanned outage. Again, you've got reputational. What happens every time AWS goes down and Netflix gets working? Everybody hears about it. Down detector lights up red. My Twitter blows up, and everybody knows about it everywhere. You don't want that to be your business. Identity-based policy. We're going to help you look at that. And then resource-based policy. We're going to bring all those disparate things in. We're going to let you look at that hybrid environment. We're going to look at your cloud resources. We are going to look at the SASE. You're going to look at the stuff like the Zscaler. your zero trust stuff. We're going to look at your on-prem devices. We're going to look at things within your environment that only live within your environment, your internal firewalls, your routers and switches. We're going to be a place to look at all of that in one place and help prevent the unintentional consequences of information disclosure, asset compromise, as well as those compliance and regulatory failures. I've seen this statistic so many times, but it is still just, it hits me every time. Through 2025, 99% of all cloud failures are going to be the customer's fault. 99% are going to be, we pushed the wrong button. Some of the things that we can look at through the NSPM platform, Network Security Policy Management, failure to remove unused or recycled access. What have you got hanging out there that isn't being used? Unnecessary access is unnecessary risk. What do we have that's overly permissive? What has a broader footprint than we thought about? Setting up incorrect zone access, letting your DMZ talk to internal, letting something perimeter facing talk to your DMZ maybe in an area that you didn't intend to. Opening access that violates compliance. Again, we're back to those, may not actually be a physical compromise, but you're opening yourself up to reputational, you're opening yourself up to regulatory fines, censures, things of that nature. Allowing access to a vulnerable host. We've all got older equipment kicking around somewhere. It needs to be maintained for a legacy reason. You need to hang on to those records. You need to have that ancient application running. But let's not allow access. My favorite formula is risk equals vulnerability times access. If we can't patch that ancient equipment sitting in the corner, then let's look at the other side of the equation. Let's cut off the access we can get to it. Rules that bypass your CASB or your SASE. What is allowing access out around that Zscaler? Unrestricted outbound access. Egress is just as important as ingress. Unplanned EC2 or VM exposure. Have you got things out there that are exposed that shouldn't be? That is where Capital One came from. Making changes to the wrong policy, security group, or network security group. Again, we are all human. 2 o'clock in the morning, you're making that change. Are you making it the right place? Access that bypasses your stealth rule. What have you got out there that is misconfigured and is going to sneak on by that? And then remote administration access, not lockdown. If you have to have that externally facing, either on your cloud stuff or your on-prem stuff, what are you doing for compensating controls? What are you doing with your ACLs? What are you doing to lock that down? We're going to help you get a handle on that. And thank you. We've got another couple polling questions, and then I will wrap up and take any questions from the audience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great presentation. My cloud polls up. Awesome.
Yeah, we've got another poll question here on the screen for everyone out there, and that is over the past 18 months, to what extent has your company accelerated its IT infrastructure transition to the cloud? And I'm curious to see the results of this one as well.
I'm watching the race here between significantly and freezing. I'm watching those two flip back and forth. It's fascinating.
It is quite a horse race. Why don't we go ahead and just take our first question, Lisa, while the audience answers this poll, and then I'll share the results and we can move on to our next poll. First question here I want to ask you is just around support for Google Cloud shared VPCs across projects is what they're asking about.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually a fairly recent addition to our product. We're able to take VPCs. For those of you that aren't familiar with Google Cloud, what you do is you have a host project. You maintain, you manage those VPCs in that host project, and then you share that out to other projects that are called service projects. What this allows you to do is it simplifies things from an administration standpoint. You can have maybe your top tier engineers making those VPCs available to maybe organizations. Maybe there's a department in your organization that's allowed to control their own service projects, but you're not really worried about configuration of those VPCs and inadvertent sharing of those. But you're going to allow them to manage their own project and get access to those resources without having to have that ownership leave your network team. So we fully support that. And I'd be happy to talk in more detail about that to anyone.
Excellent. All right. Well, let me go ahead and share the results about regarding the poll here. And it looks like 27% are shifting at the same pace, but 21% are accelerating to the cloud, 19% slightly accelerating, and 19% slowing down, 12% freezing. So a little, kind of even distribution there relatively, but there's a good number, 40% roughly, of companies out there are either significantly accelerating or slightly accelerating. What's your take, Lisa?
Well, that's interesting. That really kind of mirrors what I'm hearing from clients. People have, like I said, they're looking at that more mobile workforce. They are accelerating that. The freezing cloud projects is a little high to me. That's surprising. I'm actually not seeing that many people that we're talking to at least freezing their cloud or slowing down. And that's also hanging out right around that 30% mark. This is kind of interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. Very cool to see. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I've just brought up another poll that says, what additional information would you like about the FireMon solution? And we'll just leave that up while we continue to take your questions. Let's see. Next question here, they're asking, will FireMon's automation tell me what NSGs I need to make changes in for Azure?
Oh, absolutely. That is actually one of my favorite features of the automation, because if you've ever read an NSG, a network security group name, they're kind of gibberish. They're assigned by Azure. You can't make a lot of changes there, but it's going to come in and tell you for the access that you need to provision. Let's go run through Policy Planner, which is FireMon automation. We're going to say we need to get from these assets to this NSG, or we need to allow access to assets in this NSG. What changes do I need to make? Exactly where do I need to change those? And how do I need to make them in a way that's safe, that I'm not exposing more than I intended to? We can absolutely automate and help you do that.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's see, another question here. They're wanting to know, can FireMon not only help us to standardize configurations, but also to ensure that we're meeting the best practices?
Absolutely. We have a robust assessment engine, all compliance-based, and I do a lot of crazy things with our quote-unquote compliance engine that have nothing to do with compliance. But you can take an assessment, no professional services are required, create your own controls, get things set up to your best practices. Got a couple of manufacturing clients now doing great work there. They've created an assessment that matches their internal policies and procedures. When they're getting ready to onboard a new device, they apply that assessment to the device before it goes into production. Then they're able to look and see, okay, here's our baselines. They're based maybe on the CIS standards plus some internal stuff. Where are my deviations? Let's get those fixed up. Let's get this device remediated. Let's rerun this assessment before we actually put it out there in production and maybe give ourselves one of those inadvertent exposures. We can absolutely do that for you.
Smart. Yeah, I can see where that would be a huge help to so many companies out there, just because it's so hard to implement the best practices sometimes, exactly to know what they are and making those configuration changes.
And I love the fact that ours is so self-serve. You don't actually have to go get professional services. One of our engineers can show you, and then you're cooking with gas all on your own.
Absolutely, yeah. There's another question here. They're asking if FireMon can help to implement zero trust.
Yes. What we can do is we can onboard, if you're using Zscaler, CloudGenix, one of the solutions we support right now, we're going to bring those in. We're going to take a look at that for you. Then we're going to help you assess your existing policies. What do we need to lock down? What do we need to bring into that zero trust umbrella? What are we going to allow? What are we going to not? And we're going to, since we're able to look at the entire environment, routers, switches, firewalls, the SASE stuff, your perimeter devices, and your cloud, you're going to be able to look at it from one location, figure out what you need to lock down, and improve that zero trust posture without going, into 7 different consoles to do it.
Excellent. And so I know we're running out of time here in our live Q&A session, but I'm curious, what should folks do to get started with FireMon?
just get a hold of us. We are happy to sit down, have a conversation, look at what you have in your environment, look where you want to go, do a personalized demo. I don't have any canned demos. We start out talking with what do you have today? What does your infrastructure look like? What hurts? Where are your pain points? And then we start looking at creative ways to go ahead, look at those, give you control of your environment, and help you solve those problems, as well as allowing you to minimize the manual overhead on your team from cleaning up those things.
Very nice. Excellent. Well, great presentation, Lisa. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
For more information on Firemon, check out the Handouts tab right there, and you can download. There's a PDF resource entitled Hybrid Cloud Visibility and Compliance. Looks very well done. You need to check that out and peruse it after the event. All right. And I'll leave up the poll question there for everyone to respond to while I announce our next prize winners. We have another Amazon $500 gift card going to Wilbert Carrera from Texas. And our next grand prize for another Mavic 2 Air drone going to Carrie Shiver from California. Congratulations, Carrie Shiver from California. All right, and with that, it's now time for our next presentation on today's Cloud Security Megacast. I'm excited to introduce you to Sam Rastogi, Product Marketing Director at Illumio. Sam, are you there?
I am. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to spend a few minutes today, and I'm going to talk about the 5 security best practices to really help you transform your security strategy around your evolving data center architecture. And I'll go ahead and quickly get started, and I'll really focus on what are those particular best practices and how can you go about in terms of designing that optimal security strategy. Now, all of you know the business is certainly moving very quickly, and there's a tremendous amount of innovation that's taking place in the data center. And the role of the data center is really about enabling the business to move faster. And from a technology perspective, software-defined networking, hyper-converged infrastructure, virtualization, all of these technologies are being more and more adopted in the data center today, and they bring a tremendous amount of IT efficiency. They enable the network to become more agile, enable use cases around scale up and scale out. And fundamentally, the applications are becoming more and more dynamic. As the DevOps team is delivering more and more applications and the shift of cloud is taking form, we're seeing that the applications are changing. And we're seeing more and more adoption of containers and microservices. The DevOps team is really accelerating the deployment of applications with CI/CD pipelines. We're certainly seeing APIs and this movement towards hybrid and multi-cloud to really take form. And if you look at the applications today, the workloads can be provisioned from anywhere. And the cloud is becoming a destination point and even an extension of the data center. And so being able to stitch together the right security strategy that allows you to truly implement and enable security that follows the workload is becoming more and more a key requirement. Now, the reality today is that your data center architecture is now changing, right? Your applications are now increasingly everywhere. There's certainly the on-prem data centers that your teams manage and maintain, but we're also seeing that multiple public clouds are coming into the equation, and more workloads are really moving across this environment. We're certainly seeing that cloud migration is taking form, cloud first or cloud native, where DevOps teams are really accelerating the rollout of those cloud applications that are truly built for the cloud. What this means for your environment today is that attack surface is now much broader than it's ever been, and the majority of the traffic that is passing through your data centers more than 75% of that traffic is now east-west, which is traffic that is going inside of the perimeter. Whether it is moving across servers, across virtual machines, containers, but we're also seeing that traffic across and even inside your public cloud environments. But the threats are very real, and certainly an onslaught of very high-profile breaches that are taking place, but it's difficult oftentimes to detect those threats from taking place. So being able to instrument the right set of security controls, bringing it deeper into your applications and workloads really helps you to mitigate that risk. Now, I'm going to focus the majority of my presentation on these 5 tips, and they're really meant to help to guide your teams in terms of designing the right security strategy for hybrid cloud. And I'll talk about each one as we go through the presentation. The first is really about how do you leverage metadata in terms of mapping those dynamic workloads that exist within your environment today, and your applications are really being driven across a few different factors and relationships. One is being able to determine what is the role that workload has within a given application. What application do those workloads consist of? Where does the workload reside within the environment? Is it across a particular physical data center or across a particular geolocation, or is this taking place across a public cloud or within a VPC within a public cloud environment, giving you the tools to really abstract those workloads. It's about being able to continually track those workloads and being able to continually map those relationships, so that way you can abstract that complexity. You know, the key challenge is if your teams had, say, a few dozen workloads, it's much easier to manually track where those workloads are. If a IP changes from a particular workload and it moves from one location to the next, it's very easy to manage the underlying security policies. But in today's applications, we're dealing with much greater scale. Applications can be thousands of workloads to 10,000 workloads, or even hundreds of thousands of workloads, and being able to very quickly map and model that metadata, so that way you can continually adjust that security posture across your workloads. The other aspect is really about, by abstracting the policy away, it's also about building flexibility to enable those dynamic workload-based policies without having to change the underlying network or even make specific changes to the underlying application. And this really involves being able to enable core screen controls. This would be things where you want to enable environmental segmentation. A good example could be if you want to enforce or isolate the traffic from your PCI environment from everything else, or if you wanted to, for instance, separate traffic from your dev test environment from production. Or you may want to enable a application ring fence where you want to isolate all the given workloads from a given application. A good example of that could be enabling isolating the Swift applications from the rest of your infrastructure. You may also want to take microsegmentation deeper, where you want to do more classical microsegmentation, where you are enforcing across a tier of web servers to a tier of app servers, or a tier of app servers to a tier of database servers. But we also, it's also important to go deeper into the workload where you may want to enable a granular access to a given process that is running on a host. So when it comes to segmentation, it's really about enabling and providing the ability to enforce at the appropriate layer, so that way you have the flexibility to enable that granular segmentation that can be implemented without impacting the rest of your deployment. The other aspect is when it comes to deploying a segmentation strategy, the key focus here is bringing in workload as an enforcement layer and working alongside of the network. The network is certainly a key vantage point in terms of enabling data center security, but the key part here is enabling the control points at the right position in your environment. And so the perimeter is certainly a key aspect, but this is where you're securing those north-south traffic flows, but it's really securing traffic between users to data center or data center to data center traffic. But the thing though is we're seeing with the transformation that's going on in the network and the push for cloud, that the perimeter is becoming more and more porous, and there are more and more holes that are existing. So it's important to also at the same time design the right segmentation in the fabric for east-west, and this is where, for instance, the infrastructure comes in, whether it is deploying firewalls directly at the fabric. You might be already deploying a software-defined network, but you're really enabling those course-level controls that can be enforced between subnets or between zones. A good example of that is securing the traffic that is existing, and maybe even inspecting that from your web servers to your app servers, or for your app servers to your database servers. What workload segmentation brings is the ability to go deeper down to a particular server, down to a particular workload, or even a process that's running on that server. And this gives you then the flexibility to enforce the right set of control at a given workload without enabling that underlying complexity. Now, I'll give you an example, and this is a deployment use case, but if you look at, say, a Cisco Fabric environment, you may have Cisco ACI running in your environment today, and you would have, for instance, a service leaf architecture where you would have Nexus switches or spine and leaf switches, and then you would also have a third-party firewall that you would then traverse the traffic. In this case, it's traffic that's going from a cluster of web servers to a cluster of database servers, and you're certainly inspecting that traffic across endpoint groups. And certainly with ACI, it will pass that traffic transparently, and that traffic that you're pushing up to your firewall for inspection will be inspected as it's going across different subnets, right, between the app to database endpoint group, for example. But what workload segmentation brings is the ability to go more granular, and this helps to enable more granular enforcement down to a particular workload, and this, or even a given process, without any of the complexity. Because now the workloads can be enforced directly at the host infrastructure you have without having to direct all of those requests up to the leaf switches for enforcement. So this allows you to scale. This enables you to enable very granular application segmentation policy without any of the network overhead or underlying management complexity in terms of pushing all of the rules at the fabric to enforce. So the workloads or the host-based layer, host-based segmentation, ends up becoming a flexible approach where you can go very granular, and it can actually simplify the overall management of policy without having to make any changes to the underlying fabric. Now, the other aspect is designing security that can be delivered in any environment at any scale. And the thing is, as I talked about earlier, the applications are now everywhere, and they're taking place across both on-prem as well as multiple clouds. And the thing is, being able to stitch together a robust and consistent set of policies for workloads that can work across any type of workload, whether it be bare metal servers, virtual machines, containers, but also extending the workload controls even across cloud native environments, or even manage databases and across your full PaaS and IaaS infrastructure where you may not have software agents. So being able to deploy protection for every workload working alongside the native controls. And with Illumio, we have a virtual enforcement node, which are software agents that can be installed at the host infrastructure, but we also have agentless capabilities that provide both visibility and automated policy, where you can then enforce that right set of policy across any given workload and across your hybrid environment. The other aspect is reducing that security complexity that exists today. And the thing is, in order to enable an effective data center security strategy, it must work across all the different tooling that you have in your environment, whether it is switches, whether it's firewalls, whether it is servers, whether it's compute infrastructure, your multi-cloud environment, your SIM-based tools, vulnerability-based management tools, or even your CMDB. The key part here is simplifying that security complexity, enabling security that can work on any network, any infrastructure, any host, any cloud, and truly anywhere. Now, the other aspect is when it comes to security, the biggest challenge fundamentally is oftentimes being able to recognize what's going on and to then very quickly take action. And this is where analytics can help you to do the hard work, being able to fingerprint your applications, being able to dynamically map the appropriate workload-based security policies. And fundamentally, it's about addressing the weakest link that's present across the entire continuum, and it's the administrators, right? Sometimes the biggest challenge, and actually the vast majority of the breaches and security incidents today are really caused by human configuration errors based upon security and firewall policy management. So being able to very quickly adopt the right set of dynamic controls is really one of the key things to really take advantage of and to address those vulnerabilities that are present across the system. And then this is my last slide, but the key part here is when it comes to building workload segmentation, it starts with visibility. It starts with operationalizing your application environment, knowing how your applications communicate, who is talking to what, why, and how, building that real-time analytics, but also at the same time automating policy and really enabling you to very quickly adjust and map dynamic changes to workloads without any of that complexity that oftentimes occurs, providing a very lightweight and purpose-built solution for workloads and enabling you to deploy a workload segmentation that's agnostic from the network or the underlying infrastructure, and it can work in any environment, whether it be on-prem or in a cloud-native world. And it's also about looking at workload segmentation at scale while also reducing any type of impact or from a single point of failure across the system. And with that, I'll open up for Q&A.
Great presentation, Sam. We do have some questions for you. While we do take those questions, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Illumio solution? So let's see, first question I see here that came in, they're asking, I can bring it up. Here we go. What can Illumio do to help me map a policy for microsegmentation?
Yeah, one of the biggest obstacles we see with customers when it comes to microsegmentation oftentimes starts with providing the awareness, being able to provide the application insights, and helping customers truly understand how their applications are communicating, who is talking to what and why. And Illumio enables that and actually builds it as part of an application dependency map. And we actually show you all the different application flows that are taking place. And then we have analytics that then guide you in terms of enabling a very quick and effective microsegmentation outcome.
Nice. Yeah, I love that ability to sort of automatically map because treating that is could be a challenge for microsegmentation without that. So that's very cool. Next question they're asking, or they say, I already have firewalls and SDN what kind of additional benefits can Illumio provide?
Yeah, so the big benefit is really helping to address the workload segmentation gaps that exist today. And what Illumio brings, for example, is it can complement existing firewalls in SDN. It'll actually help to map out the application dependencies. It'll actually help the network teams and security teams in terms of mapping out security policy. The other thing Illumio can do is it can actually push workload context directly into, for example, firewalls. I'll give an example with Palo Alto Networks firewalls. We actually push real-time workload context directly into dynamic address groups with Palo Alto firewalls. And what that enables Palo Alto customers to do is they can enable now those dynamic workload policies and changes in Panorama or in their firewalls without having to manually go in and adjust those IPs. Illumio really plugs the gap and actually provides full automation to really automate those dynamic address group changes.
Excellent. Excellent. And then another question, how does Illumio help me to future-proof security over time as my data center architecture evolves?
Yeah, and this is really some of the strength that Illumio brings is the fact that our workload segmentation solution is decoupled from the network fabric. And the thing is, we actually tie into well over 40 different types of technology solutions out of box. And so this is really about enabling you to leverage your investments that you've already made, whether it is the infrastructure, the load balancers, the firewalls, but also extending that out across multiple clouds and even cloud-native environments. We also not just have ability to enable agents that you can deploy on the infrastructure, we also have agentless technology, and this really enables you to enable that visibility and control across all workloads that exist within your on-prem and multi-cloud environment today.
Very nice. Very nice. There's a couple questions here, Sam, about what firewalls is Illumio compatible with?
Yeah, so Illumio works with all the major firewalls. We do have some integration, for example, that I mentioned with Palo Alto Networks. There's some documentation that is there in both the Palo Alto NextWave partner site as well as the Illumio site. And the thing is, because Illumio is working at the workload layer, we are completely complementary to the existing fabric as well as the firewalls and infrastructure that's there.
Nice. Very nice. Let's see, Christopher commented that we used Illumio recently to segment our network, and we found ports and communications that we weren't aware of. It's a solid product. Great to hear that. Another question they're asking here, can Illumio help as our workloads move across data centers and across the cloud?
We absolutely can. And whether it is starting, you can start, for example, across a cloud-native environment. We have agentless capabilities that you can deploy, or you can initially deploy Illumio in the data center. You can deploy it across your bare metal servers and hypervisors and containers. We really provide you flexibility of choice. You can start where you want to start in terms of securing the particular applications and workloads in your environment today.
Excellent. And then, Sam, what should folks do to get started with Illumio? How can they get illuminated?
All right. We actually have some great resources. There's actually 5 rules to design to design data center security across your environment. I definitely recommend that everyone take a look at that. We got a lot of rich content on the Illumio website. And lots of information in terms of what Illumio does, but also how we can help you with data center security or to help you to very quickly implement and to reach a zero trust outcome.
Awesome. All right. Well, excellent presentation, Sam. Thanks so much for being on the Megacast today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For everyone out there, if you haven't responded to the poll, we do appreciate your feedback on that. Also, check out the resource that's available there in the Handouts tab. That'll take you to the Illumio Resource Center. There's a ton of good information in there, solution briefs, videos, white papers, upcoming events. So make sure that you check out that. There's also a button right there to try Illumio. You can try out Illumio for yourself, and that's always the best way, in my opinion, to get started. So thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. I'll go ahead and announce our final prize winners now. We have another Amazon $500 gift card. This is going out to Anchor Nayar from Texas. Congratulations, Anchor Nayar from Texas. And our final grand prize for our drone, Mavic Air 2 drone, this is going to James Snyder from South Carolina. Congratulations, James Snyder from South Carolina. I'll post all the prize winners right now in the questions pane. All right, and with that done, it's time to wrap up today's Cloud Security Megacast. Don't forget to subscribe to the Actual Tech Media podcast in the iTunes Store, the 10 on Tech podcast. If you are a potential sponsor or speaker on an upcoming Megacast or EcoCast, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com to learn about presenting. Don't forget to subscribe to the Gorilla Guide Book Club over at gorilla.guide. There's a link to that there in your Handouts tab. And then at the end of the event here, you'll automatically be referred to our event referral page. If you have IT friends or coworkers that you'd like to share what we're doing here at Actual Tech Media, enter their email address there. We won't spam them, and you will both be entered into an Amazon $300 gift card drawing that's held each month. And with that, I want to remind everyone to join us and watch your email inbox for an invitation to another upcoming Megacast on supporting, extending, and protecting virtual environments happening on Wednesday, September the 1st. Hope to see you there. I hope that you enjoyed today's Megacast, and have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.